Chapter 19 of Ben Pepper. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Rob Kay. Ben Pepper, by Margaret Sidney. "Yes," said Polly gleefully. "You can't think, Jasper. It's such a beautiful monkey." "That's a fact," declared Ben. "Or rather, I should say, the very ugliest beast you can think of, Jasper." "Ben!" exclaimed Polly reproachfully. "When did it come? Did Mr. Cabot really give it to you?" cried Jasper, all in one breath, and deserting his pillows at once. "Oh, he didn't give it to me," said Polly. "It's a present to all of us. It's yours, Jasper, just as much as anyone's." "Dear me!" cried Jasper, quite overwhelmed at being part owner in the Christmas gift of a monkey. "Well, when did it come, Polly?" "Just 2 days ago," said Polly, trying to remember all the fun they had enjoyed with their new acquisition. "Though it seems, ages, and he's been so cunning." "How I do want to see him!" cried Jasper eagerly. "Where is he? I should think Joel would worry the life out of him." "Well, for once I guess Joe has got his match," said Ben, bursting into a laugh. "I asked him to come along with us and show Jocko off this morning, and he said no, and showed a lively pair of heels." "Jocko? Is that his name?" asked Jasper with the liveliest interest. "Yes," said Polly. "That's what the sailors named him, Mr. Cabot said," added Ben. "So you told me, Polly," turning to her. "Yes, I did," said Polly. "You see, Jasper, Mr. Cabot was having some things brought out from India, and he thought he'd send for a monkey for a surprise to us. And the sailors petted him all the way over, and—" "Who, Mr. Cabot?" interrupted Ben mischievously. "No! Aren't you ashamed of yourself?" cried Jasper in a pretended rage. "Go on, Polly. If I weren't tied to this old chair, I'd pommel this chap for you. Well, where is the monkey now?" "Oh, Thomas has him in a little room in the stable," said Polly. "He's chained up, you know, but by and by we're going to have him in the house, when he's tame and nice." "Oh, dear me, how I should like to see him!" said Jasper with a long breath, and sinking back against the pillows. "Dear me, well, I wish you could," breathed Polly wistfully, and a regretful look swept over her face. Why had she told Jasper about the monkey? Better to have waited for the surprise to come out tomorrow, and her head drooped sorrowfully. "Never mind, Polly," said Ben, who never could bear to have Polly look sorry over anything. "Jasper would rather have the fun of hearing about the monkey today than wait to see him." "But why should I have to wait to see him?" said Jasper. "There's no reason he can't come up here to see me." He looked first at Polly, then at Ben. "What?" cried Polly, coming out of her sorry little fit to stare at him. Whistled Ben, and he stuck his hands in his pockets and stared too. "Yes, there isn't any earthly reason why the monkey can't come up here," said Jasper persistently. "And I really need him. He'd cheer me up," he added. "Yes, there's no doubt of that," said Ben with a chuckle. "Well, then bring him, do, there's a good chap," said Jasper, leaning forward to bestow a resounding clap on Ben's shoulder. "Goodness me," said Ben, backing away. "If Dr. Fisher could only feel you, he'd let you downstairs fast enough. There'd be no need of bringing monkeys or anything else up to you." "Well, Dr. Fisher isn't here," said Jasper, laughing, "and I am made to stay up here. And just think how dull it is," he added artfully. "That's a compliment now," said Ben, "when we've tried to entertain you as hard as we can." "Well, I didn't mean that. You know I didn't," said Jasper, coming out of his laugh to look very much distressed. "You know I didn't, Polly, don't you?" he begged, appealing to her. "Yes, I do," said Polly. "No, you didn't mean it at all, Jasper." "All right, now tease away," said Ben. "But I do want to see that monkey dreadfully," said Jasper, returning to the charge with renewed effort when he saw that his last unfortunate remark was perfectly understood. "It would be just the way to make me entirely well." "I do believe it would, Ben," said Polly, whirling around to him. "Be the very best thing, as Jasper says. Oh, do let's bring him up." She flew off from her hassock to rush to the door. "Well, I can fetch him as far as that goes," said Ben, getting up slowly from his hassock. "If that monkey has got to come, why, I'll bring him." "Good for you!" shouted Jasper in huge delight, and clapping his hands together. "But I warn you, he's a perfect tempest," said Ben, moving off to join Polly. "You don't need to go, Polly," he said. "I'll bring him."
"But I can do it much better," said Polly, "because he knows me, Ben, and you've only seen him once."
"And that was quite enough for both the monkey and me," said Ben with a little laugh.
"Well, prepare yourself to receive Jocko,"
he tossed back over his shoulder to Jasper. "And don't blame me if he's too much for you."
"I won't blame you,"
promised Jasper in huge delight. Then he doubled up one of his pillows and tossed it across the room to give vent to his feelings, as Polly and Ben ran off downstairs to do his bidding. It was all he could do to wait with even a show of patience. Yet they did it very quickly, considering the distance that had to be run over, and the little formality to be gone through with of detaching Jocko from a plate of cake bits that one of the maids had just left with him.
"Oh, he oughtn't have had that anyway,"
said Polly, twitching his chain.
"Come away from it, Jocko. It's bad for you to have so many sweets."
But Jocko, not thinking so, chattered and scolded, wrinkling up his eyelids and showing all his teeth at her.
"Polly, the beggar will bite you,"
said Ben, laying a hand on the chain.
"Oh, no, he won't," said Polly. "Now, Jocko, you are not going to have all that plate of cake. Come away."
For Jocko had scrabbled all he possibly could of the sweet bits into both cheeks, spreading his paws over the remainder in the dish to protect it. And Polly gave such a jerk that Jocko was twitched clear away from the tempting morsels.
"Polly, Polly,"
remonstrated Ben in alarm,
"he surely will bite you. Give me the chain." "Oh, no, he can't," said Polly. "See, his mouth is full."
Which was quite true, Jocko's cheeks being puffed out to that degree that he couldn't very well use his teeth to attack with.
"Well, he will as soon as he has swallowed that mouthful, the greedy thing," said Ben. "Here, you," and Ben picked up a stick from the corner.
Jocko viewed it with the air of acquaintance, as if Thomas had showed it to him before, and immediately spit out all the cake, rolled up his eyes beseechingly, and folded his paws.
"Oh, you cunning thing!"
exclaimed Polly, throwing her arms around him, while Jocko seized her gown and huddled and snivelled into it, getting away from Ben as far as possible.
"Polly, how can you?"
cried Ben in disgust.
"Well, he's just as sweet as can be," said Polly. "Oh, dear, do put down that stick. He's so afraid of it." "Indeed I shan't," declared Ben, brandishing it wildly,
whereat Jocko danced a perfect waltz around Polly, clinging to her brown gown and gibbering at every step.
"I do hope Thomas doesn't whip him with it," said Polly, whirling around uncertainly with the monkey's antics. "Oh, you don't suppose he does, Ben, do you?"
"Nonsense. You know Thomas wouldn't hurt a fly," said Ben.
"But Jocko has probably tasted a stick on board ship, Polly, or a rope end, or something worse. And it's just as well to show him something now that he will respect."
It was a long speech for Ben.
"Well, we ought to hurry," said Polly, "for it's so hard for Jasper to wait."
So away they ran, Jocko getting between their feet at every chance he could find. And then,
"Well, here we are,"
announced Ben, as they all three dashed, or rather tumbled, into Jasper's room together. For Jocko, seeing here a grand opportunity, plunged in suddenly, dragging the chain before them so that Polly promptly fell over it, and in trying to save her, Ben lost his balance.
"Well, I should think so!" exclaimed Jasper, starting forward. "My goodness, what an entrée!"
"Well, you ought to be thankful that we've got here at all," retorted Ben, extricating himself and helping Polly up.
"And if you don't get enough of this beast, I miss my guess." "Oh, isn't he perfectly lovely?"
cried Polly, racing up and pulling Jocko along to Jasper's chair.
"Did you ever see—"
She couldn't finish, for Jocko, not considering it necessary to wait for any further introduction, leaped up to Jasper's shoulder and laid his little black, cold, slippery nose against the nearest cheek.
"I told you you'd get enough of him,"
cried Ben, bursting into a laugh.
"Oh, your face, Jasper!"
as Polly twitched the chain so that the monkey sprawled at once on the floor.
"Oh, well, that's all right,"
said Jasper, recovering himself and wiping his face dry with his handkerchief. "Is it?" laughed Ben.
"I'm glad you like it. There, Polly, bring him a little nearer. I don't want him on my shoulder, you know,"
Jasper was saying.
"Oh, don't you?" said Ben. "I thought he was all right up there." "Let me take the chain," said Jasper, paying no attention to Ben. "Oh, Jasper, I'm afraid you're not strong enough," said Polly fearfully. "Hadn't I better hold it?" "Oh, I'm strong enough," said Jasper.
So Polly, although with many misgivings, handed the chain to Jasper, who pretty soon had the monkey on his knee, examining all his fine points, and becoming acquainted with his exceedingly expressive countenance. "Now, isn't he a dear?" cried Polly, dancing in front of Jasper's chair, and regarding the new pet with affection. "He certainly is," said Jasper, making Jocko give him his paw, and teaching him to feel in his pockets. "Oh, Polly, get me a lump of sugar, do, there on the tray." So Polly ran to the little silver bowl, and came back with 2 sweet blocks in her hand. At sight of them, Jocko gave a greedy little cry, and tried to spring off from Jasper's lap. "Oh, no, you don't, sir," said Jasper, holding him fast by the collar. "You must hunt for them. Give them to me, Polly." So Polly put the sugar lumps into Jasper's hands, and he dropped one into each pocket. "There now, hunt, sir." Which Jocko, wrinkling up his flat nose, was glad to do. "Did you ever see such sweet little fingers?" said Polly, dropping to her knees by the side of the big chair, as Jocko, finding one sweet lump, dragged it forth triumphantly, to set sharp little teeth in it. "Fingers! Oh, Polly!" exclaimed Ben, coming up, stick in hand. Jocko grunted and chattered, one eye on the stick, while he nibbled away. "Oh, Ben, do put it down," begged Polly. "All right," said Ben, depositing the stick on the table. "Lie there. But see that you behave, Mr. Jocko." "He says he will," said Polly with a laugh, as Jocko gave a little scream, his sugar being all gone. Then he began to hunt for more, puckering up his forehead in the search. He was quite sure there were 2 pieces, and he must hurry and get the last one. So he pulled and pawed and scratched and scrabbled over Jasper in his efforts to reach all his pockets that might be possible, Ben laughing as much as the other 2 in the process. At last Polly looked up. "Oh, you are getting tired, Jasper," she exclaimed in dismay. "I believe I am," confessed Jasper. "My sides fairly ache with the laughing. But don't take Jocko away," he said, clinging to him. "Well, we ought to," said Ben, "for you are tired, and my sides ache too." "We might tie Jocko up for a while," suggested Polly, who hadn't the heart to go against Jasper's wish. "That's it. Tie him up till I'm a bit rested," said Jasper eagerly. "Here, Jocko, go with your mistress." And he put the chain in Polly's hand. "Well, where is a good place?" asked Polly, twitching Jocko off from Jasper's knee. "Come on, Ben. Where shall we tie him?" "Oh, I don't know," said Ben, looking about him doubtfully. "Why, to the doorknob, perhaps." "Wouldn't the bureau handle be better?" asked Polly. "The table leg, Polly," suggested Jasper. "The table leg, oh yes," cried Polly. "Now then, Jocko, you must be very good." And she knelt down by the table, dragging the monkey up to her. "Let me fasten it for you," said Ben, coming up. "Oh, I can do it," said Polly, pulling the chain around the table leg and taking a little loop in it. "There, sir, now you're fast," as she jumped up and brushed her brown gown with both hands. "He mussed you all up," cried Ben, "and see, his hair's all over your dress." "Never mind," said Polly, who always liked everything very nice. "They'll come off," and she brushed away smartly. "There, that's all right now, Benzie. Oh, let's talk over what we are going to do tomorrow, our real Christmas." And she flew back to Jasper's chair. "Yes, do," said Jasper. "Come on, Ben." "You know, of course, there's the tree," began Polly, as the 2 pulled their hassocks and sat down again on either side of Jasper's chair. "Yes, of course," said Jasper. "Christmas wouldn't be Christmas, would it, Polly, without our tree?" "No, I should think not," laughed Polly. And Ben saying the same thing, they immediately launched into an animated recital of all the plans for this particular tree, and the comparison with all the other trees of the past Christmases, till they forgot Jocko and everything else in the charms of this belated holiday. "What's that funny noise?" at last asked Ben in a lull, when all 3 had paused to rest. "What? I don't hear anything," said Jasper, pricking up his ears. "Nor I," said Polly. "Oh, yes, I do." She sprang off from her hassock and ran around to the table. "Why, Jocko, where?" she cried. Ben got off from his hassock. "Well, that explains the noise fast enough," he said grimly. "Why, where is the whip?" going over to the table. "Dear me, I don't know," said Polly. "I haven't touched it." She began to fly all about the room. "Jocko, Jocko, dear," she cried coaxingly. "The little scamp has taken the whip," said Ben, too vexed to smile. "How can you laugh, Jasper? I don't see. Now then, we must find that beast. My goodness me!" He dashed off. As Ben seldom took any but deliberate steps, Jasper stopped laughing to see him go. The next instant, "Come, Polly," called Ben.
Where?
She was over by one of the long windows, shaking the curtain, fully expecting to see the runaway hiding within its folds. "In the bathroom!" shouted Ben. So down the little passageway, tiled and wainscoted, clattered Polly on hasty feet, to find Ben holding Jocko by the collar, and the bathtub running over with water, both faucets being turned on, and several articles, the broken whip among the rest, floating on the top. Jocko was grinning and cringing, with sharp, sudden squeals for pity when he saw Polly. "Take care, you'll wet your feet," warned Ben. "The water's all over the floor," which Polly soon found out the moment she stepped on the tiled surface.
"Oh, dear me,"
she gasped, stepping gingerly in.
"Squeal, squeal."
Jocko set up more elaborate attempts to attract her attention.
"Do turn off the faucets, Ben,"
said Polly, hurrying over to peer into the tub. "Oh, I have, long ago," said Ben, "but I can't let the water out."
"Why, Ben Pepper, there is Jasper's As You Like It,"
said Polly in anguish, hanging over the bathtub.
"I know,"
said Ben.
"Hush, Polly, Jasper'll hear you." "Oh, dear, and I most know there are his sleeve buttons."
"Yes, and lots things more," said Ben grimly.
"So I can't let the water off, for they'd all run down. Why, Ben Pepper."
Polly forgot the wet floor, and she splashed up and down in great distress.
"Oh, I must bail it out," she cried. "I see Jasper's watch and chain down at the bottom." "Stop, Polly. You're getting as wet as anything and splashing all over me,"
said Ben.
"Now then, you little scoundrel," to Jocko, "I'll tie you up so that you won't get loose again in a hurry."
And he fastened the chain, in a way that no one but Ben could do, to the doorknob. Then he came back and rolled up his sleeves, Jocko beginning to sob and whimper since Polly wouldn't look at him.
"Do you run out in the hall and call down the tube for Jane,"
said Ben.
"Jasper can't hear, for his door is shut." "But I must tell him what is the matter,"
said Polly in great distress.
"Listen, he's calling. Polly!"
Evidently Jasper was calling.
"Ben, what in the world is the matter?"
came from Jasper's room.
"I'll tell Jasper," said Ben.
"You get Jane up here to clear this water out. Do, Polly."
"Well, don't tell Jasper about his Shakespeare,"
said Polly, hurrying off on her wet feet, "nor the watch."
"No, I won't," promised Ben.
"Oh, nothing much, old chap." He went down the passage and put his head in at Jasper's door.
"It's Jocko, you know, we found him." "Oh, that's good,"
cried Jasper.
"And nothing has happened to him, I hope."
"No," said Ben, "there hasn't."
"That's good,"
said Jasper again. So Ben went back, and Jane came up with her pail and mop and cloths. And presently a fine array of articles was brought to view on the bottom of the bathtub, to add to those floating on top.
"Oh, Ben, did you ever in all the world?"
said Polly, aghast, as she fished for the things.
"I don't see how he had time to do it."
"Well, he used it pretty well," said Ben.
"See there, Polly Pepper,"
holding up what had once been a necktie.
"And it's quite ruined,"
said Polly, choking off a little sob. Then she deserted the bathtub to fly over to the monkey.
"Oh, you naughty, naughty! Oh, Ben, what has Jocko got in his mouth? He's choking."
"Nonsense, he wouldn't choke," said Ben. Yet he left fishing in the bathtub for more articles of Jocko's depositing, and went over to investigate. Jocko, when he saw Ben coming, spit out a mouthful which proved to be pins, while he tucked with one paw a small article underneath him, and blinked up at Ben's face.
"Spit out the rest,"
commanded Ben, "or I'll get another switch, do you hear?"
"Oh, he'll choke,
cried Polly in great alarm.
"What shall we do? He has ever so many more in his cheeks. Oh, you bad Jocko!"
Jocko spit out a few more pins, then wrinkled up his eyebrows and grinned and chattered.
"Get out the rest, sir,"
said Ben, "or the switch, you know." Fretting dismally, Jocko stuck his paw clear into his cheeks and poked the pins out until none seemed to remain. Then he sat up straight, scolding frightfully.
"Where did he get the pins?"
exclaimed Polly wonderingly.
"Where did he get anything?"
said Ben. "You might as well ask."
"But he didn't have them when we found him,"
she went on.
"Oh, yes, he did. He must have,"
said Ben.
"And he's hidden more somewhere about him now, you may depend. Get up there, Jocko."
But Jocko, seeing no fun ahead of him if he lost that little cushion, sat still and glared, showing all his teeth at Ben.
"Oh, mercy me!"
exclaimed Jane, with her gown tucked up, busy with her mop and pail over the tub.
"He'll bite you, Master Ben."
"Yes, he will," said Polly in a terror. "Oh, Ben, do let him alone." "I'll let him alone for a minute," said Ben, hurrying off. Presently back he appeared, flourishing Jasper's riding crop. At sight of this, Jocko drew his teeth in, and slunk down into a little heap of abject misery. "Get up," said Ben, flourishing the whip threateningly. "Oh, Ben, don't strike him," pleaded Polly.
"And if you do, he'll jump at me most likely,"
said Jane, with only a thought for her unprotected ankles.
"Please don't, Master Ben."
"I'm not going to," said Ben. "Only he must get up. He's sitting on something. He's hiding. Now then, will you get up?" he cried, swinging the whip in the air. Jocko, who saw the riding crop going up, supposed naturally it was coming down. Not desiring to receive it on his body, he made a quick movement and leaped. Jane, who had followed all proceedings with extreme anxiety, saw no reason why he shouldn't come her way, and to leave the space she had been occupying she decided without delay. But forgetting the pail half full of water she had mopped up from the tub, she promptly fell over it, into the pool on the floor. "What is it?" cried Polly, picking up a small object where Jocko had been sitting. "Why, Pen Pepper, it's Jasper's little pin-cushion, the one I made for him last Christmas." End of chapter 19.
Chapter 20 of Ben Pepper. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Twinkle. Ben Pepper by Margaret Sidney. Chapter 20. Repairing Damages. And that afternoon Jasper was sleeping. Nobody had told him, of course, of the result of Jocko's pranks, so Polly and Ben could steal off for a bit of Christmas shopping on their own account. "I shall pay for the Shakespeare, for it's all my fault that Jocko did those bad things," said Polly as they hurried along. "No, it isn't, any more than mine," said Ben. "I oughtn't to have let him up there." "But you said we'd better not, all the time," said Polly truthfully. "Well, and then I let him up," said Ben, "so I'm just as bad as you, Polly." "Well, you did it because Jasper wanted Jocko so much," persisted Polly. "That's the only reason, Ben." "Yes," said Ben, "but never mind what the reason is. I let him up all the same, so I'm going to pay for it as you like it. You've got to buy a new pincushion, Polly." "I know it," said Polly. "Oh, dear me, how I wish there was time to make another one before Christmas." "Well, there isn't, the very idea!" exclaimed Ben. "Why, that is tomorrow. Besides, Jasper will want a new pincushion right away." "I know," cried Polly with a little sigh. "Well, let's buy that first. Candace has some little cushions, so I'll get one of her." And they turned into Temple Place and ran into the small shop. There was a bell over the door that jingled smartly whenever a customer stepped in. This had the effect now to bring Candace waddling in from the little room beyond, which was bedroom, kitchen, and all. She had been dressing a rag doll, and her blue checked apron still had some wisps of wool sticking to it, while she raised her black hands, one of the fingers still retaining its big horn thimble. "For de land's sakes, Miss Polly, and Mas'r Ben, I'm glad you's home again." "Oh, Candace," cried Polly, beginning to unburden her woes, when the two were seated on some stools before the counter that ran along one side of the room, "you can't think what trouble we're in." Candace, just reaching down from a shelf above a jar of peppermint and cinnamon sticks, with which she meant to regale her visitors and celebrate Ben's return, started so she nearly let the big glass jar fall. "For the land's sakes!" She could get no further as she turned to them a frightened face that seemed to suddenly grow gray. "Don't scare her, Polly," whispered Ben. "Tell her at once what has happened." "You know, Jocko." "Hey?" said Candace, setting the jar down with a thump to rest both shaking hands on the counter. "Jocko, our monkey. Oh, I forgot. Candace, you don't know about our present that Mr. Cabot gave to us all. Well, it's a monkey. The dearest, yes, he is the dearest thing, even if he has been bad," said Polly decidedly. "A monkey!" screamed Candace, lifting both black hands. "And Mr. Cabot give you dat, did he, for a present?" "Yes," said Polly. "Wasn't he kind, Candace?" "Well, I don't know," said Candace slowly. "Mr. Cabot's a very nice gemman, a very nice gemman indeed. He comes in here and buys tings often and often, but I should have thought he'd give ye a little purtier ting than a monkey. Just a grain purtier," she added, unwilling to criticize any more sharply. "Well, he couldn't have given us anything that was nicer," said Polly, loyal to both Mr. Cabot and to the monkey. "Only you see, Jocko didn't quite know how to behave." "I should think he didn't," observed Ben. "He's only just come from India," said Polly, feeling that a little more explanation was necessary before stating just how bad the monkey had been. "Whar's dat?" asked Candace in wonder. "Oh, the other side of the world," said Polly hastily. "And so you see—" "De oder side of the world!" cried Candace. "My land o' Goshen, how do you know that? Who brung 'em?" "Oh, the sailors. He came on a ship, and so you see, perhaps he learned some naughty tricks," said Polly, hoping that now the recital of the bad deeds would be softened enough to state her errand at the shop. "And so he didn't know any better, maybe, than to chew up Jasper's little cushion." "He ain't gone and chewed up dat ar pincushion you made Mas'r Jasper!" cried the old woman. "Yes, he has," said Polly sorrowfully, her brown head drooping. "That is, he's bitten a hole in one corner and got it all soiled and wet." "And you worked and worked on dat ar pincushion," cried Candace in a loud, wrathful tone. "I can see you now, honey. Don't you remember how you brung it down here for Candace to match you some pink cord to go right round the edge?" "Yes," said Polly, "I remember, Candace." "And don't you remember how I matched dat pink ribbon? Laws, you'd 'a' thought it was just made for it, wouldn't you now, Miss Polly?" "Yes," said Polly, drawing a long sigh, "I should, Candace." "And dat orful old brack monkey has gone and chewed up dat nice little pincushion you made all alone by yourself, 'cept such as I helped you." Candace drew herself up to her full height. "Well, he ought to have every single one of his teeth pulled out," she declared with a bob of her head that nearly unsettled her turban. "Oh, no, Candace," protested Polly in a tone of horror. "Yes, he had, honey," declared Candace decidedly, "'cause don't you see he'll be a chewin' up oder tings, like enough some o' Miss Phronsie's dolls." With that, the same scared look swept over her fat face, till it looked quite gray again. "Oh, Candace, we wouldn't ever let him do that," cried Polly, and Ben hastened to say, "See here, Candace, don't you be afraid. We'll look out for those dolls." "Will you for sure, Mas'r Ben?" cried Candace, grasping his arm with both sets of black fingers, which sent the big horn thimble flying under the counter. "It would be most dreadful if anyting should ever happen to them, 'specially to the dear ones I made for the little miss. Why, they've got hard just like my very own." And she lifted one hand to point to her gay turban with pride, then clutched his arm again. "And I made every stitch of your clothes." "You needn't worry, Candace," said Ben quietly, "for I'll look out that Jocko doesn't disturb those dolls." "Sure?" cried Candace, surveying him with anxious eyes. "Sure," said Ben, not taking off the gaze of his blue ones. Candace's arms fell away to her sides. "Well, if yer promises me, Master Ben, I know it's all right. Now you must have some candy sticks." And she lifted off the cover of the big glass jar. "I'll find your thimble first," said Ben, getting down on his knees to lift the gay flowered calico curtain that hung from the counter edge. This was easier said than done, for the big corn thimble, now that it had gotten away from Candace's black finger, decided to take a holiday. So although Ben prowled and peered around amid the boxes and bundles beneath the counter, he couldn't lay his hand on the little runaway. Seeing which, Polly decided to begin the trade by which she could be the possessor of another little pincushion to take the place of the one just spoiled by Jocko. So Candace handed down the box containing them, and together they searched through it for something that would fit the need. "I'm going to make Jasper another one, you know," said Polly, "but I must buy him something to use right away." "Well, I got some perfect beauties," said Candace, lifting out a flaming yellow one with great delight. "See dar now, Miss Polly, did you eber know I had dat in my shop?" "No," said Polly. Then she searched the corner of the box and pulled out another, but it was a faded green one, very dismal and quite tired looking. "Now dat was made out of one of my ole Missis's bunnet strings," said Candace, raising it with a quick hand. "It's a very special ribbon. Ain't dat fine, though?" She balanced it on her black hand, lost in admiration. "I don't believe I want a green one," said Polly. "Don't you?" said Candace. "Well, now, let's see, honey." But she was very much disappointed, and set down the little green pincushion slowly by the side of her yellow treasure. Polly glanced up at her over the box edge. "Candace," she said, "I thought you had some little cushions. You showed them to Phronsie once for her dolls. Don't you remember?" "Oh, dem?" said Candace, wrinkling up her black face. "Why, they were teeny little bits of things." "Well, I've just thought I could sew 2 or 3 of them together," cried Polly, the color flying up into her cheeks. "And don't you see they'd be just as cunning. Oh, do look and see if you have any pink ones." So Candace, delighted to see that Polly could look so, waddled off to a farther corner, and presently came back with another box, which when opened showed 3 or 4 little cushions racing along at play inside. "Dey ain't pink," said Candace. "I 'member I sold all of dem." "Oh, dear me!" exclaimed Polly, dreadfully disappointed, and seizing one end of the box. "Let me look," and suiting the action to the word. "Oh, yes, they are, as sure as anything, Candace. You have some pink ones." "Sure I have," said Candace, quite as delighted. "At least, you have one, anyway," said Polly, her tone dropping some of her elation. "Oh, how I do wish Why, there's another. Pick it out, Candace," she concluded in great excitement. So the second little pink cushion was brought out and set on the counter alongside of the first. "Well, now, how I do wish there was just one more, Candace," said Polly, pushing up the damp rings of hair from her forehead, for it was pretty anxious work. "For I can get along with 3 so nicely. But you haven't another single one," she mourned. "No, I hain't," said Candace, "and dat am a fac'. But why couldn't you take a white one, honey? Dat would look real nice," she added, holding up one persuasively. "Oh, I want a pink one," said Polly, not looking at the little white one. "I did want 3 pink ones fastened together, Candace. They would be so pretty." "But if you ain't got 'em, why you hain't," said Candace with decision. "So what's the next best thing to do?" "Oh, I suppose to take the white one," said Polly, turning away from the box with a sigh. "But the pink would be so nice." "And you better not think about the pink ones," said Candace, opening a drawer to get out some soft paper, "but be glad you could get a white one to mix in. Supposin' I hadn't had nothing but green ones." "Dear me!" exclaimed Polly. "Yes, I know that would have been dreadful, wouldn't it, Candace?" "Dat's so," said Candace, smoothing out a wad of paper, "as long as you don't like de green ones. but I think that one made out of old Missis's bonnet strings is a perfect beauty. Old Missus always had the very best old ribbon." "Oh, I want some pink ribbon to tie the little cushions together with," said Polly at the mention of ribbon. "And I must have some narrow white too, Candace, please." "Well, I'm glad I found that thimble," said Ben, lifting a very red face to the counter edge, and presently getting up to his feet. "Here, Candace, now don't let that run away from you again. That's my advice." "Oh, Ben, how hot you are!" exclaimed Polly, as Candace received her horn thimble, which she put on her black finger with great delight. "I should think I was. Never felt so hot in my life," said Ben, in a tone that Candace, who was rummaging through the narrow ribbon, could not hear. "Phew!" and he began to walk up and down the small shop, stretching his legs in great satisfaction. "Dear me, that feels good." "And now you must have the candy sticks," said Candace, setting down the little rolls of ribbon before Polly, then uncovering the glass jar again. "That's fine," said Ben, and taking a cinnamon stick and crunching it in a way to make Candace's round face beam with satisfaction. "You do have such nice candy sticks, Candace." "Don't I?" she said, wriggling in delight. "Well, now, take another, Master Ben." "No, no," said Ben, "I've this big one," holding it up. "Yes, you must take another," she urged, handing out the biggest stick the jar contained. "No," said Ben, much distressed, "not unless you'll let me pay you for it, Candace." But her black eyes fell so at the very thought of this, that he hastened to add, "Oh, well, then I will take it, and thank you, Candace," meantime running his eyes over the little showcase to see if there was anything he wanted to buy. "And you must take a piece to Miss Phronsie, that blessed child," said Candace, doing up another stick with Polly's, which there was no time to eat in the shop, with such important business going on. And presently Polly and Ben hurried on, Polly carrying her little cushions and the ribbon, with a big bundle of a ball of twine, and some pencils stuck out of Ben's pocket. "Well, now, Polly Pepper, you and I must just hurry," said Ben, striding off. "There's that Shakespeare book to get, and that red necktie." "I know it," said Polly, setting quick little steps beside his long ones. "And we mustn't be out late, because Jasper will wake up and might want us." "I don't believe Papa Doctor will let us up there to see Jasper again today," said Ben grimly as he strode on. "Why, we didn't hurt Jasper being up there this morning," said Polly in a surprised tone. "Papa Fisher said so. You know he did, Ben." "That may be," said Ben, "but all the same, I don't believe we'll be allowed up there again this afternoon." "You know Papa Fisher said we had done Jasper good," persisted Polly, trotting along briskly by Ben's side. "So there, Ben Pepper." "I know that," said Ben with a nod, "but Papa Fisher always lets well enough alone. And you and I won't be invited up there again this afternoon, I tell you that, Polly Pepper. All the same, we must hurry, because Mamsie wants us home early." "So she does," said Polly, almost breaking into a run. "Hold on," said Ben, catching her sleeve. "Don't race like that through the streets. It isn't proper." "I do so wish," said Polly, flourishing her little bundles, "that it was ever proper to run in the street." "Well, it isn't," said Ben, with a sharp eye for the bookstore they wanted. "Well, here we are, Polly. Now for that Shakespeare book." When they marched home an hour later, Joel ran out of the big stone gateway with Pip at his heels. The two Whitney boys and Davie were making good time down the winding driveway. "Whoop!" screamed Joel. "Where you been?" and beginning to swarm all over them and seize their bundles, while Pip ran up to Ben and slipped his thin little hand into the firm big one. "Hands off!" cried Ben, "from those bundles, Joe." "Where you been, and what have you got?" demanded Joel. Then, without waiting for an answer, as the other boys were hurrying up and would let out the news, he screamed, "All those mountain children are coming to supper." "What?" cried Polly, standing quite still. "Yes, and the old lady," cried Joel. "Every single one of them. You needn't try to tell anything," to Percy and Van and David as they plunged up, all out of breath. "I told it long ago." Chapter 20.
Chapter 21 of Ben Pepper. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Andress. Ben Pepper by Margaret Sidney. Chapter 21. The Postponed Christmas Morning. Well, the next day, what a Christmas it was, to be sure! Jasper was to come down in the morning to see all the fun of the last preparations, go upstairs after luncheon to be a prisoner in his room, and dress for the grand dinner and tree in the evening. All the boys in his set crowded in, pretty soon after breakfast, to the big library. "Oh, me!" cried Alexia, running in and raising her long hands. "What did you make me come so early? The very idea!" "Well, it seems you are here, Alexia," said Pickering coolly, lounging in one of the big easy chairs. "Well, it's quite different," said Alexia, nowise abashed. "And you know it, Pickering. Why, Polly needs me." "Does she?" said Pickering. "Yes, of course, so I had to come." Whereat Clare laughed, and one or two of the other boys joining in, Alexia turned on them. "You've no idea how much work girls have to do. Now, you boys don't lift a finger at any such a time as this." "Don't we?" exclaimed Pickering. "Well, that's a fine thing to say." "When we've been over here, at least Pick has, every day for a week, and the rest of us ever so many times, helping Polly," cried Clare, in a dudgeon. "Oh, well, that was such a tiny little bit you could do, anyway," said Alexia airily, and tossing her long light braids. "The important parts all have to be done by us girls. Boys are in the way." "Indeed! Well, why don't you go back and help Polly?" retorted Clare, "instead of staying here with us." "Oh, I'm going," said Alexia. "I only came in to see what did make you all come so early. Why, it's hardly after breakfast." "Oh, you here!" Ben hurried in and gave the long figure sprawling in the easy chair a clap on the back. "You're the very one Polly and I want. And come on, you chaps," addressing the other boys. "There's a job waiting for you all." Pickering got out of his chair with a little laugh, while the other boys roared. "What's the matter?" asked Ben in a puzzle. "Oh, nothing," said Pickering as he went out. "Only Alexia is glad to see us set to work." "Yes, I am," said Alexia. Then she laughed and ran ahead to get first to Polly. "There's always one good thing about her," said Clare, as the whole group of boys tumbled promiscuously after. "She never minds when the joke is against her." "That's so," they nodded. There, sure enough, was quite sufficient to do for all hands that appeared, as soon as they found when they reached the busy playroom, where the tree, all shrouded in white, was awaiting them. And pretty soon the happy babble of voices kept time to the swift fingers as each boy took up the piece of work that Ben or Polly gave to him. Alexia seemed to be quite busy flying here and there, doing a little of everything. "I'm glad you did come so early, Clare, after all," she condescended to say, coming up to him in one of those flights as he was tying an extra rope of laurel. "Thanks," said Clare. "Well, now, don't you suppose, seeing that you are here, that you can hold the other end for me? 'Twould be a sight easier to tie the thing." "The very idea!" exclaimed Alexia, backing off. "Now that's just like a boy. Why don't I ask you to come and help me tie laurel strips?" "Because you never tie them, I've observed," said Clare composedly. "Well, it's because I have so many more important things to do," said Alexia. "Anybody can tie a laurel string." "Can they?" said Clare, laboring away slowly. "Yes, indeed." And Alexia skipped off, turned, and flew back. "Oh, dear, do give me that old rope," seizing the end, and flounced down on the window seat beside Clare. "You needn't if you don't want to, Alexia." Yet his face brightened. If there was anything Clare hated to do, it was to tie festoons. "Oh, yes, I will," said Alexia. "You boys do anything without asking the girls to help. Here, let me tie for a while, and you hold." "Oh, you don't want to do that," said Clare in amazement. "Yes, I do. It's stupid to hang on to an old rope and sit still. Besides, I can tie ever so much better than you," said Alexia, possessing herself of Clare's handful. "I don't doubt it," said Clare, bursting into a laugh, "though I never saw you tie one in my life." "Oh, that's because we have to leave something for you boys to do," said Alexia, nowise put out, but tying away at a great rate. "Polly and I have much more important things to do, as I've always told you. Here, why don't you bunch for me?" "But I've seen Polly tie wreaths and ropes ever so many times. Oh, 100, I guess," said Clare, beginning to bunch for the long fingers. "Oh, well, Polly does everything," said Alexia easily. "Oh, dear me, here's Kathy, and all the other girls." With that, down went the great festoon to the floor, while she rushed to the door. Clare picked up the dangling thing, made a grimace, and set to work again, while the bustle and happy hum of voices became quite a babel. "Now isn't that fine that you have come?" cried Polly affectionately, and flying around the bevy of girls. "You see we've got to hurry so much because we want to get the new wreaths and festoons up before Jasper comes down." "So we'd better set about it," said Ben in his practical fashion. "Now then, Kathy, suppose you help Polly. She's—" "Oh, no, I'm going to help Polly," cried Alexia, edging up between the two girls. "Why, I thought you were helping Clare a minute ago, and he hasn't finished," said Ben in surprise. "Oh, that stupid boy!" cried Alexia, running her arm through Polly's. "He never will be done." "Well, that's all the more reason why you should help him out then," said Ben with a laugh. "Now, Kathy, you're to help Polly," he finished, just as if the most agreeable thing were being said for all hands. Alexia gave him a long look, then drew her arm slowly away from Polly's and went back to Clare. "I don't see how Ben Pepper always makes us do what he wants us to," she grumbled, throwing herself into a seat beside Clare. "Do give me that horrid old thing, and let's get through with it." "Oh, are you back again?" said Clare. "Yes, but I shouldn't be," declared Alexia, positively, and beginning to bunch furiously, "if Ben hadn't made me. You are so stupid and slow, Clare." "Thanks," said Clare, tying slowly. "Well, don't throw the bunches at me. They get all mixed up that way." "And you are so cross," said Alexia, breaking off little twigs of the laurel with nervous fingers, "that I can't suit you anyway, and here I am working my fingers to the bone for you." "Would you rather tie?" asked Clare, trying not to laugh at her face. Alexia eyed the long festoon with a dubious gaze. "No, I shouldn't. Oh, I'll keep on at this if it kills me." "Oh, Jasper!" It was Ben who shouted it, and sprang to welcome him. And then, for the space of a minute, there was no more work done, while everybody crowded around to see Jasper fixed in a big easy chair at the side of the long room, where he could get the best view of everything. Suddenly a small figure emerged from a heap of greens in the corner, where some thin little fingers had been picking out sprigs for the busy hands to weave into wreaths. "Hello, Pip!" cried Jasper, putting out a warm hand, as Pip sidled up. "Now that's good to see you," throwing his arm around the thin shoulders. "Having a good time, Pip?" And he bent his head for the reply. "Yes," said Pip, "I am." "Now that's fine," declared Jasper again. Well, fly back to work," and he gave him a pat on the back. Pip sidled off again and lost himself in the pile of greens. "Miss Polly, they've come," announced Jane, opening the playroom door and advancing to Polly. "Who?" asked Polly, holding a wreath for Ben to nail up over the little window. "Not that way, a little more this other side," she said, as Ben placed the nail in it. "Who, Jane?" "Why, those poor children at Mrs. Van Ruypen's," said Jane. "What? Oh, you don't mean they've come this morning!" exclaimed Polly, quite aghast, and dropping the wreath. "Now something has happened," cried Alexia, dropping the little bunch of laurel. "I must see what it is," and she sprang off. "Polly, don't look so," she begged. "What is it?" Ben sat down on the step-ladder, having heard Polly's exclamation, but missing Jane's words. "What is it?" he asked. "Oh, Ben, those dreadful children have come over this morning," cried Polly, aghast and quite swept along, "to spoil all our fun." Ben stepped down quickly. "Is that so, Jane?" he asked. "They shan't come in," cried Alexia, vindictively, and running over to slam the playroom door. "Alexia," called Ben, "come right straight back here." "Well, Polly doesn't want them," grumbled Alexia, yet she came back. "Never mind if they do come in," said Ben, laying a soothing hand on Polly's shoulder. "What harm will they do, Polly?" "They'll spoil every bit of our fun," said Polly, with the flashing brown eyes. "Every single bit. You know they will, Ben. And that Elvira, oh, they can't come in." "There, you see," said Alexia, beginning to wring her hands. "You'd much better let me shut the door and keep them out, Ben Pepper." "Polly," said Ben, as he turned her off to a quiet corner, "perhaps they have never seen a Christmas tree. Why, what am I talking about? We know they haven't." "Well, they are coming to it tonight," said Polly, the flash dying down a bit. "And that's enough, I'm sure," she added obstinately. "But the fun of getting ready. Oh, Polly, supposing somebody had come into the little brown house and asked us to come up to help get a tree ready. Just think, Polly." Polly dug the toe of her shoe into a heap of greens. Then she suddenly threw her arms around Ben's neck. "Oh, I'm a selfish pig, Ben," she cried. "Do let them come in." Ben gave her an approving pat. "Now you're fine," he said. "Come on, we'll call them in," taking her hand. "Oh, now you've gone and made Polly let those dreadful children in," cried Alexia, nervously, envious that she was not to go too, as they ran by her. "Jasper," said Ben as they passed his chair, "it's the mountain children. They're waiting outside now. We're going to have them in to help us." "Phew!" whistled Jasper. Then he added in delight, "The very thing I wanted most of all was to see those mountain children. Do hurry and fetch them." Which urging was not in the least necessary, as soon appeared Elvira in her smart blue gown, clear in advance of either Polly or Ben. She pushed her straight locks out of her eyes and gazed around, wholly unabashed. "Hullo, Elviry!" called Joel in delight from the other end of the room, but she paid no attention to him, as she had not completed her gaze to suit her. "I'm awful glad you've come," said Joel, springing off the chair on which he was standing, holding a festoon for Pickering to nail in place. "Here, come back, you beggar!" cried Pickering. "We're having awful fun," announced Joel, coming up to her and sticking out a grimy little paw, all resin and pitch from the branches of pine he had been breaking. His face was smeared as well. "You're awful dirty," said Elvira, picking the blue gown away as if she feared contamination. "Well, it's fun, I tell you," said Joel, not a whit nonplussed. "Come on with me," attempting to draw her off to Pickering and the deserted chair. "I ain't a-goin'," said Elvira, twitching off. and I'll slap you if you don't go away." Meantime, Ben had charge of the two boys. Matthew wore his overcoat and beloved red tippet, which Madame Van Ruypen had hard work to make him discard in the house, wound around his head and ears. "Now, Jasper," and Ben led them up to the big easy chair. "This is Matthew, and this is Mark Hansel." "Oh, how do you do?" said Jasper sociably. "I'm glad to see you." Matthew bobbed his head, bound up in the red tippet, solemnly, but Mark was too far gone in amazement at the scene before him to do anything but stare. "Now, Elvira," said Polly, going up to her where she stood glaring at Joel, who still persisted in his sociable advances, "you come with me," and she put out her hand. "I ain't a-goin' to," declared Elvira, stubbornly, and putting her hands back of her. "Oh, you bad, wicked, awful girl!" cried Alexia, hovering near. "Elvira," said Polly, and there was a little white line coming around her mouth, "you will come with me, or else you must go home." "Not to stay with that great big lady," said Elvira in dismay, her hands falling to her side and her face filling with terror. "Yes, you surely must," said Polly decidedly. "Go right back and stay with Madame Van Ruypen, unless you do as I say." "Then I'll go with you." Elvira slipped her hand into Polly's, made a final grimace at Joe, who, dreadfully disappointed, went back alone to Pickering. "So this is Elvira," said Jasper, looking at her kindly. She didn't seem to see the hand he put forth. "What you sitting there for?" she demanded abruptly. "Oh, well, they make me," said Jasper, with a little laugh. "He's been sick, Elvira," Polly made haste to say. "Now come, child, you can help me." "I don't want to. I'm goin' to stay here," said Elvira, laying a hand on Jasper's chair. "Elvira," Polly got no further, but it really wasn't necessary, for she went without further words. "Polly, make her come over here and help me," called Joel from his chair. "No, she's going to stay with me," said Polly, but she gave a sigh. Pip, who had raised his head at entrance of the visitors, ducked it behind the pile of greens at sight of Elvira, and now he shivered as her thin, high voice piped out, "Where's that other boy?" "The boys are all here," said Polly absently, as indeed they were, even little Dick, who was happy with Phronsie in a quiet corner, tying little wreaths for one of her doll houses. "Oh, I don't mean those boys," said Elvira, waving her thin arms scornfully around the roomful. "They're no good. Where's that other boy that was at supper last night?" She craned her neck to catch the sight she desired. "She means Pip," said Alexia. Pip, at hearing his name, unguardedly raised his head. "There he is! There he is!" exclaimed Elvira joyfully, and deserting Polly, she rushed over to the pile of greens. "I'm going to play with you," she said. But Pip slipped nimbly out and was over by the step-ladder and scrambling up. "Take her away!" he howled, burrowing up to Ben. "Ow! Take her away!" Polly rushed over to the pile of greens. "He ran away," cried Elvira with flashing eyes, "and I had come to play with him." "Elvira," said Polly, getting down on her knees to look into the angry eyes, "what did I tell you? Either you will mind what I say, or Ben will take you right over to Madame Van Ruypen's. Which shall it be?" For answer, Elvira seized Polly's brown gown with both hands and sniffled into it. "Oh, don't send me to that big old woman. Don't, don't, don't." "Then will you let Pip alone?" said Polly sternly. "Yes, yes," mumbled Elvira. "Very well, then, come back with me," and Polly led her over to the work with Ben. But as Pip would not come down from the step-ladder unless Ben brought him, and even then he had eyes of terror for Elvira, there was some delay before the wreath over the lattice window could be hung up. Meantime, Jasper was getting on famously with Matthew and Mark, who were soon tying wreaths, one on either side of him. "You'd better take off your tippet, Matthew," said Jasper at length, seeing the drops of perspiration roll down the red cheeks. "Oh, I ain't hot," said Matthew, pulling the green string tight with strong fingers. "Dear me," said a voice, strong-lunged and hearty, "this looks very comfortable." "Oh, she's come!" Elvira dropped a green sprig she was holding for Polly, and seized her gown. There stood Madam Van Ruypen, surveying the roomful with an air of the greatest satisfaction on her face. "Get her a chair, Ben," cried Polly. "Elvira," shaking herself free, "if you don't behave, you remember," and she hurried off to greet the visitor. "Well, this is quite comfortable," repeated the old lady, first going up to speak to Jasper, and then sitting down in the chair that Ben brought, wiping it off carefully on the way. "She looks like a big polar bear," said Alexia in a whisper to Clare, to whom she had flown up again, and was now bunching rapidly. "Dear me, I don't see how she can stand so many furs and things." "Well, she's taking them off now," said Clare. "See, Ben's helping her." "She thinks there's nobody like Ben," said Alexia, diving onto the floor for a specially nice green bit. "Well, there isn't," said Clare, holding up his festoons to squint along its outline. "I do believe this is almost done, Alexia." "Well, I should think it was quite time," said Alexia, stretching her long arms restfully back of her head. "You've been so awfully slow over it, Clare." "Yes, I do believe it is," repeated Clare in a joyous tone. "And if that old woman is going to stay here all the morning," said Alexia, "I shall just die. 'Twould be too awful for anything, Clare." "She wouldn't hurt you," said Clare, tying away with redoubled vigor at the delightful prospect of soon having it through. "And if Polly and Ben can stand it, I guess you and I can." "Well, I'm going to turn my back on her," said Alexia, whirling around so that her light braids flew out. "Then I shan't have to see her every minute." "Yes," Madam Van Ruypen was saying, "I thought I'd bring over a few things that were forgotten for the tree, you know," pointing to its white shrouded outline with her long black glove. "They're out in the carriage, Ben. Will you tell Carson to bring them in?" "What is she saying? Oh, what is she saying?" cried Alexia, wildly, and whirling about again till her braids flew out the other way like pump handles. "I thought you didn't want to see her." Clare burst out into a laugh. "Oh, this is different. She's telling something, and she doesn't sit up like a great stiff I don't know what," said Alexia. Then she hopped up from her seat and ran over to the old lady's chair. "Yes, and I have something I'm going to bring over to night," Madam Van Ruypen was announcing, as Ben and Carson, the coachman, came in, their arms laden with bundles of all shapes and sizes, all carefully wrapped from curious eyes. "Ow!" howled Joel, taking a flying leap from his chair. "Come on, Pip, she's got things." "I sent for the minister, Mr. What's his name? Oh, St. John," the old lady was saying. "It will be a good thing for him to have a bit of city life, and he can help to manage these children." She waved her black gloves over to the two boys, but gave the most attention to Elvira after all. "Till I get a little accustomed to them, and he's to get here this afternoon, so I'll bring him over to the tree to-night, Ben." End of chapter 21. Chapter 22 of Ben Pepper. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Ben Pepper by Margaret Sidney. Chapter 22. Around the Christmas Tree. And the young minister came hurrying down on the mountain express train, reaching there in the very nick of time, as Madam Van Ruypen observed. She was thus able to appear with him at the grand dinner at the King household, where she was to preside at one of the small round tables, for the big state dining table was to be discarded for this Christmas night, and the assembled company were to meet around little tables. This had been decided upon after an important conference held by Grandpapa, Aunty Whitney, and Polly. So much, now to her great satisfaction, Madam Van Ruypen looked round as she sat up, resplendent in black velvet, lace, and gems, in her little company. There was the young minister, of course he had the seat on her right hand. Ben, equally of course, had the other side, and, as long as Ben was there, why Polly must be. And then there was Jasper. Well, everybody wanted him, but he said, "Oh, I'll sit with Polly and Ben." So he had a particularly soft and easy seat, with soft cushions piled back of him, for it would be truly dreadful if he should get too tired. And then Alexia sat down before anybody asked her, and she looked so horror-stricken at the idea of being at any other table than the one where Polly Pepper sat, that Madam Van Ruypen laughed and said indulgently, "Oh, let her stay," for which Alexia loved her ever after. And then Pickering Dodge was discovered in a corner, with such a longing eye that Polly cried out in the kindness of her heart, "Oh, do let Pick come to this table." So there he was, and that made 7. "A very comfortable number," observed Madam Van Ruypen, shaking out her napkin with a happy hand, so that all the jewels on her fingers fell to trembling and shining at a great rate. Just then Pip rushed up and flung himself against Ben's chair, holding on with excited fingers. "Let me, Ben," he cried, "sit with you," his little pale face all aglow. "Oh, we can't have that boy," said Madam Van Ruypen decidedly. Ben's ruddy face went quite pale. "I wish we might," he said, fixing his blue eyes on the Roman nose and white puffs. "Oh, no, indeed," said Madam Van Ruypen, shaking the big white puffs more decidedly yet. "You see for yourself there are 7 seats. Any more would be quite uncomfortable." "I don't need so much room," said Ben, shoving his chair. "Nor I," said Jasper. "Dear me, it isn't necessary that I have this great big thing. It's that which takes up so much room." "Oh, yes, you do, Jasper," said Polly, quite alarmed at his efforts to move. "You must keep that chair, at any rate." Ben looked over at Pickering, in great trouble. Meantime he held Pip's nervous fingers fast. "I don't see," said Pickering, swallowing something that seemed to choke in his throat, "why we can't all move up just a bit, you know," beginning on his own chair, "or else, why, I'll quit and go to another table." "Oh, no, you shan't, Pick," declared Jasper. "Not a bit of it." He looked so distressed at the mere thought that Polly beseechingly raised her eyes to the stately, forbidding old face. "Oh, if you all like to be crowded," said the old lady, meeting Polly's brown eyes, "why, I'm sure I don't care." So the butler bringing a small chair, Pip crowded in next to Ben, and everything was merry once more. And the young minister proved to be quite nice, and Madam Van Ruypen fairly beamed at him as the feast went on. And Pickering Dodge and he struck up quite a friendship across the table, and even made plans for a skating match on the morrow. "Now tell me," at last said the old lady, when the talk ran a bit low, "what I can do with my boys, and that girl." She glanced to the end of the room, where Elvira, despite her disappointment at not being at Joel's table, was comforting herself as best she might by giving undivided attention to a chicken wing, which she held in both fingers. "You'd better send them to school," said Mr. St. John quickly, "and just as soon as you can get them there." "Will the mother allow it?" asked the old lady, brightening up. "Will she allow it? My dear madam!" The minister straightened up and forgot how afraid of her he was when she sat, a formidable figure in the little mountain church of a summer Sunday, and how very much he had disliked her, albeit her generous contributions whenever the plate went around. And now he smiled broadly. "If you could only have seen her win that box—" "Never mind that," said Madame Van Ruypen, abruptly, and waving her hand with authority. "The question is, will she allow me to send those children to school?" "I think there's no doubt about it," said Mr. St. John, determined to find his own way to tell the story as he wanted it to appear. "Well, as I was saying, that cabin—why, we didn't any of us know what that poor woman was suffering. I blame myself." His head dropped, and he drummed on the table with his fingers. "Nonsense!" exclaimed the old lady. "You're not to blame." Then she added, with a remembrance of the summer spent in the mountain nook, "I'm sure I should have known." "My dear madam!" exclaimed the young minister, very much shocked to think that in the face of all her generosity he should have thrust a question for reproach. "You have been so very good, and have saved them all." "Perhaps so," said the old lady grimly, "but it wouldn't have been a bad idea if it had happened earlier, I'm thinking." "But just think, if it hadn't gone to them just when it did," continued the young minister, determined to have the benefaction receive its full measure of appreciation. "Why, that poor mother was hurrying down to tell the selectman she could do nothing more. The children were starving, and he must take them to the poorhouse, when she met John Bramble, the expressman, you know, with the box in his cart." Madame Van Ruypen laid down her fork and made a violent effort to get her handkerchief out of the velvet and jet bag that dangled from her waist. As for Polly and the others, they never thought of eating, but listened with their eyes fixed on the young minister's face. "I never supposed it was as bad as that," said the old lady brokenly, at last, with her fingers on her handkerchief, beginning to feel a little bit better. "Nor did any of us," said Mr. St. John. "Why, John Bramble hasn't got over it yet, and I don't know that he ever will. Well, the misery is over now, thanks to you." "All the thanks necessary to be expressed," said Madame Van Ruypen, quite recovering herself, and laying a hand on Ben's arm, to pull him forward into notice, "are due to this lad here." Ben slunk back covered with confusion, and wished for nothing so much as to roll under the table quite out of sight. Seeing which, Jasper spoke up. "Oh, it would be fine to have them go to school, wouldn't it?" and diverted attention so that it gave Ben time to breathe freely once more. "Yes, indeed," said the minister, "it would be the making of them. And then that would give you a chance to have Luke and Matilda and Jane come down for a visit, maybe," and he laughed, he couldn't help it, at the face before him. "I think not," said the old lady dryly, "at least for a spell, until I get a little rested from Elvira." And then they all laughed. But the main thing was settled. The mountain children were to go to school. Ben could hardly believe his ears, and he forgot to eat his dinner, while he gazed across the room where Matthew and Mark were placidly engaged at that pleasing occupation at a table with Joel and a whole company of other boys. Matthew had finally been induced to have his red tippet taken off, but insisted on keeping it across the back of his chair, where in the intervals of the dinner he could now and then feel of it. "Oh!" Ben gave a long sigh of satisfaction. "What's the matter?" cried Madame Van Ruypen, turning off from the young minister. Then she glanced at Ben's full plate. "This lad would rather look out for those boys than to eat his dinner," she said, which made Ben feel so ashamed again that he picked up his knife and fork, and with a very red face plied them briskly. Well, at last As everything must have an ending sometime, that delightful dinner drew to a close, and then Grandpapa, who sat at the table of honor in the center of the spacious apartment, with Phronsie at his side, rose and made them all a little speech, and said that, although the Christmas this year came a little late, it found them all very happy, as, please God, the sick one was well, and they had so many new friends to make good cheer with them. And he wished every one the merriest of all Christmases. And then there was a great burst of music out in the hall, and a big orchestra, cleverly concealed in a thicket of palms and ferns, struck up the liveliest march. And all the company, Grandpapa and Phronsie of course leading the way, set forth in a procession that finally wound up in the big playroom to circle around the Christmas tree, still under its white cloud. And then, in the beautiful rose-colored light streaming from the long lines of candles in their red shades, the choir boys from St. Stephen's marched in and around the white enfolded tree, singing their beautiful carol. Pip, clinging to Ben's hand, started forward, entranced, as his little pasty-colored face looking keen and alight. And as the choir boys sang on and on, Madam Van Ruypen found herself strangely drawn to it. "I must ask Mr. King who that boy is," she said to herself. But she didn't have a chance to hear any recital that evening. Dear me, who could expect it, with a Christmas tree party in full blast? And then the tree was unveiled, to stand forth in all its glory. Oh, such a brilliant sight! And they all took hold of hands, forming in a big, big circle, and marched around it a couple of times. And then a smart jingling of sleigh bells was heard. "Oh, he's coming!" screamed Phronsie, clapping her hands and dancing, little Dick doing the same. "Who?" It was Elvira, who picked Phronsie's little muslin sleeve. "Santa Claus," said Phronsie, turning a happy face with dewy eyes. He is coming!" And she danced harder than ever. "Who's Santa Claus?" demanded Elvira, but nobody heard her, for the jingling sleigh bells suddenly paused, and in he popped, the old saint himself, right through the window. Now, although Miss Mary Taylor was there, nobody thought to ask her where Mr. Hamilton Dyce was, except when Phronsie piped out, "I want him," and ran up to Miss Taylor, who blushed and looked prettier than ever. But after the presents had all been given out, and Santa Claus had bowed and disappeared, to get into his sleigh and drive off with his reindeer, Mr. Hamilton Dyce made his appearance in the midst of the festivities, wiping his forehead and looking very hot, but smiling all over his face. At sight of him, Phronsie dropped Grandpapa's hand and ran up to him. "I wanted you," she said, "and you didn't come." "But I'm here now, Phronsie," said Mr. Dyce, swinging her to his shoulder. "Yes, you are here now," repeated Phronsie, folding her hands in great satisfaction, and surveying the company from her high perch. "But you didn't see Santa Claus," and she gave a little sigh. "Oh, well, I saw him out there." Mr. Dyce bobbed his head toward the hall. "Did you?" cried Phronsie in great delight. "And wasn't he a nice Santa Claus?" She bent down to gaze into the face beneath her, whose cheek she patted. "I'm glad you liked him," said Mr. Dyce, laughing. "And did he get into his sleigh?" cried Phronsie, in great excitement. "I heard the bells. Oh, I should so very much like to see him once drive off." "Oh, I didn't see him get into his sleigh, Phronsie," said Mr. Dyce. "Didn't you?" said Phronsie, much disappointed. "Well, now, we ought to go over and see what Grandpapa wants," said Mr. Dyce, catching sight of the old gentleman's face. "And there are such a many presents for you," said Phronsie in a happy little tone, and patting the broad back. "You don't say so!" cried Mr. Dyce. "Oh, yes, such a many! Do hurry and get them. gurgled Phronsie, as off he pranced with her on his shoulder. Presents? Well, if Mr. Hamilton Dyce had many, what can be said of the gifts that had been rained down on all sides for every one else in the big room? And the best of it all was that each one seemed to think that nothing ever could be happier, as a selection of gifts, and that no Santa Claus who would understand them better could by any means have visited them. "But I like this best," said Matthew, and he laid his hand on the red woolen tippet. Ben and he happened to be alone in a corner. "Do you, though?" said Ben, his eyes lighting. "Yes, I've always wanted one," said Matthew. Chapter 22.
Chapter 23 of Ben Pepper. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Linda Andrus. Ben Pepper by Margaret Sidney. Chapter 23. The Sleighing Party. "Oh, yes, Pip," said Ben, "you must go." "Oh, I don't want to," cried Pip in great alarm, and clinging to Ben's hand, he huddled up closer than ever. "Don't make me go to that old woman's. Don't," he pleaded. "Why not?" asked Ben, whirling around to let his blue eyes search keenly the distressed little face. "She looks at me so," said Pip, squirming uncomfortably. "She's always looking at me." "Well, supposing she does, she won't bite you," said Ben, with a little laugh. Then he stopped suddenly. "Now then, Pip," and he put his hand on the small shoulder, "it's best for you to go. There's to be a jolly good time. Just think, Madam Van Ruypen is to give you all a sleigh ride. And off you'll go into the country, and have a supper, and come home by moonlight. Why, everybody's going." "Are you going?" asked Pip, suddenly his face emerging a little from its wrinkles. "Well, no, I'm not," said Ben, "but everybody else is. I'm going to stay with Jasper." "Oh, I won't go, I won't go," screamed Pip, wholly beside himself with distress. "I'm going to stay with you, I am." With that he wound his wiry little arms around one of Ben's and beat his feet nervously on the floor. "See here now, Pip." Ben lifted him clear from the floor and set him down on the window seat. Then he stood in front of him. "Now just look at me," which Pip did, swinging miserable little feet and twisting his hands. "It is best for you to go on this party, and so you must go. Why, you'd have to stay with Jocko if you didn't," added Ben, "or else amuse yourself." "Oh, I don't want to stay with Jocko," replied Pip, who had good reasons, after his introduction to the monkey by Joel, for this decision. "Well, you needn't," said Ben, bursting into a laugh, "but you must go on the sleighing party, and without me. Do you understand, Pip?" Pip did, after he had carefully scanned Ben's face. At first he snivelled softly, but at last even that died away. "Very well," said Ben. "Now then, you are to go with Joel. He'll see that you have a good time, for he said so. Here he comes now," as hasty feet scampering down the back stairs proclaimed Joel's approach. "Where's Pip? I can't find him," cried Joel, rushing up with a very red face. "Oh, here he is. Well, come on, Pip," and he plunged toward the door. "Hold on," roared Ben. "Pip has got to go up to Mamsie. She's going to put some extra things on him so he won't get cold." "Oh, bother," said Joel, beating his feet impatiently on the floor. "Why, there isn't any need for such a tremendous hurry, Joe," said Ben. "Now then, Pip, step lively upstairs to Mamsie's room. She wants to fix you up herself." So Pip slowly got off from the window seat, and with many a backward glance at Ben, he crept upstairs. "Go ahead, old snail," sang out Joel beneath. "Oh, dear me, he'll never be ready, Ben," and now he beat his woolen mittens together as he pranced up and down the hall. Oh, yes, he will, said Ben soothingly. Don't rage so, Joel. And he's such a muff, said Joel, but he said it under his breath and with one eye on Ben. Hush up, Joe, said Ben. There's no use in talking that way. And what are you in such a hurry to get to Madame Van Ruypen's for? Why, she doesn't expect you till 3 o'clock, and it's only— Ben pulled out his silver watch. 25 minutes past 2. What a silly thing you are, Joe. Joe dug the toes of his shoes into the rug. Larry'll get there first if I don't, he whined. You know he will. Nonsense. And what if he does? You aren't invited till 3 o'clock. Wait and go with Polly. Oh, I'm not going with a lot of girls, cried Joel, in a dudgeon, and extricating his toes from the rug. You know they're always coming for her, Ben Pepper. Well, go with Percy and Van, said Ben. Don't fly off in such a tangent. But this suggestion only added fresh fuel to Joe's fire to be off. Oh, do make Pip hurry. He fairly howled it now. Percy and Van have started already, I most know. They said they'd get ahead of me. And he rushed up and nipped Ben's arm. Goodness me, what a crab you are, Joe, said Ben, shaking him off, and then feeling of his arm. Well, do make him hurry, begged Joel. Oh, dear me, all the boys will get ahead of me. Well, let them for once, said Ben coolly, and Auntie Whitney won't allow the boys to go now, you may be sure. So rest easy, Joe. And one thing more, you are not to race Pip over there at lightning speed. Do you understand, Joe? Oh, dear, said Joel, wrinkling his round cheek in great disdain. He's such a— Yes, yes, I know, said Ben hastily. Well, now, I'm off to Jasper. Oh, Ben! Joel flew after him. I wish you were going, I do. Well, I'm not, said Ben, so good-bye. He pulled his jacket away from Joel's detaining hand, got around the corner of the hall, and hurried up the front stairs. Meantime, Polly was having a perfectly dreadful time in little Dr. Fisher's office. There he sat behind his big table, rolling up some powders in tiny papers, and looking at her over his spectacles. Oh, please, Papa Doctor, begged Polly, clasping her hands, do let me stay at home. That won't ever do in all this world. Dr. Fisher shook his head gravely, and the big spectacles seemed to blink so much displeasure at her that Polly felt very wicked indeed. It would stop the party at once, Polly. Well, it's no fun at all, said Polly mournfully, without Jasper and Ben. She could hardly keep the tears from streaming down her cheeks. I don't suppose there'll be so much fun in it as if Jasper and Ben could go, said the little doctor quietly, but that isn't the question just at present. It seems to be the best thing that the sleighing party should be carried out. Think of those poor children, Polly. Polly twisted uneasily on her feet. And how they've never in all their lives had any pleasure like this, the little doctor proceeded artfully. Oh, dear me, said Polly. And what such a thing in Badgertown would have meant to you children, Polly, said the little man softly. He laid down his powdered papers and looked at her. Oh, I'll go, exclaimed Polly, perfectly overwhelmed, and running around the big table to throw both arms around his neck. I knew you would, Polly, my girl. There, there, Dr. Fisher patted her gently. Now that's right, and your mother will be so pleased. She told Madame Van Ruypen that she was sure you would help the thing along. So bundle up and start. That's right. He set his spectacles straight and fairly beamed at her as she ran out of the room. Dear me, you were so long in coming, Ben, Jasper was exclaiming from his big easy-chair. I've been watching that door as a cat does a mouse for the last hour. Hulloa, said Ben, advancing to the chair, and nonsense. You've only just about finished your luncheon, I'll be bound. Well, it seems ages ago, said Jasper with a little laugh. I tell you, Ben, It's awfully dull to be kept in bed all the morning." And he made a grimace at his canopied resting place. "Well, you sat up so late last night, and just think of all that fun," said Ben. "Oh, I know I'm an ungrateful wretch," said Jasper, bursting into a laugh. "Well, I don't care now, as long as Dr. Fisher allows me to have you. Where are all the others, Ben?" he asked suddenly, as Ben hurried to draw up a chair. "Oh, they are going to be with Madam Van Ruypen," said Ben, carelessly making a great deal of unnecessary noise over getting the chair in place. "Oh," said Jasper. "You know those mountain children," said Ben, feeling something else was expected. "Yes," said Jasper, "I know. Is Polly going?" "Oh, yes, of course," said Ben with wide eyes. "Why, they couldn't do without Polly, you know." "Of course not," said Jasper. Then he twisted uneasily in his big chair. "It's an awful nuisance to Polly," he broke out. Ben said nothing, not thinking of anything that seemed just the right thing to say. "And that girl, that Elvira. Oh, dear me!" Jasper pulled himself up quickly. "So you'll just have to put up with this person this afternoon," said Ben. "And I'm sure I'll be glad to," cried Jasper, affectionately. "Oh, Ben!" He leaned over so that both of his pillows immediately tumbled out. "And I was going to give you a regular bear hug," he said ruefully, as Ben hopped up to put them in place again. "I'll be willing to put it off till you get well," said Ben, laughing. "Now then, see that you don't knock those out again," and he drew a long breath. "Well, what do you want to do now?" "Oh, I tell you," said Jasper, and his dark eyes sparkled. "Let us play chess. And do get the new ones that Father gave me last night at our Christmas. We'll christen the set this afternoon." "We shall go twisted all the year, shan't we?" said Ben, as he hurried over to the table for a box of chessmen, in the midst of the overflow of gifts, "because we had such a belated Christmas. Aren't these just fine?" coming back with it in his hand. "Aren't they so?" cried Jasper, seizing the box eagerly. "And isn't Father good to give me a new set? And such beauties!" He emptied the box on the sofa blanket across his knees, while Ben went to draw up a small table to set them on. "Oh, not that one!" cried Jasper, looking up from his delighted examination of his new treasure. "Do you suppose for an instant that I'm going to play on that old table when I have a brand new one that Sister Marian gave me last night? Why, Ben Pepper, what are you thinking of? No, sir—ree, not by a long shot." "Excuse me, your high mightiness," said Ben, pushing back the old table and hurrying over to get the new gift. "Will that suit your Majesty?" he asked, setting it down in front of Jasper's chair. "Perfectly," said Jasper, setting a good handful of the chessmen on the table, and Ben bunching the others up from the little hollow in the sofa blanket. They were soon all there in a heap. "Now which do you choose?" asked Jasper, putting a red and white piece in either hand, and thrusting them behind him. "Oh, dear me," said Ben, "it won't make any difference, for you'll beat me all to death, just as usual." "Nonsense," laughed Jasper. "You know as much about the game as I do, Ben Pepper." "Indeed, I don't," said Ben, stoutly contradicting. "Why, you knock the life out of me every time we play. Just think of that last score, Jasper King." "Oh, well, a beat doesn't always signify who's the cleverest," said Jasper quickly. "Doesn't it?" said Ben with a little laugh. "Well, I always thought it did." "Well, which do you choose?" asked Jasper impatiently. "We never shall get to play if you don't make haste." "Oh, the right hand," said Ben. So the red queen was placed in Ben's hand, and the two boys fell to work to set the pieces, and the game began. "The same old story," said Ben at its close. "There you go, checkmating me, and I haven't even begun to move half my men." "Oh, well, you'll have better luck next time," said Jasper, beginning to set his men again. "I'm going to get a paper and pencil for the score," said Ben, hurrying over to the desk in the corner. There now, game number 1, J beats. I might as well mark ditto down for game number 2 and all the rest." "Nonsense!" exclaimed Jasper, who was now setting Ben's men. "You'll probably beat me out of sight next time." "Probably," said Ben sarcastically, and they fell to work again. And it was ditto, and number 3 also. But on game number 4 the luck turned, and Jasper's men, after a long fight, were routed. "What did I tell you?" cried Jasper, who, although he had put up as good a game as he could, was greatly pleased at Ben's success. "Oh, well, once," said Ben, leaning back in his chair. His round face was very red, and he mopped it with his handkerchief. "I worked harder than I used to, chopping wood," he said. "Well, we won't play any more," said Jasper, yet he looked longingly at the men he was setting. "Oh, yes, we will. That is, when I've rested a minute," said Ben, getting out of his chair to walk up and down the big room and swing his arms. "You set my men, and I'll be ready then." "Oh, walk away and swing all you want to," said Jasper. "I'll set your men. Oh, I say, Ben." "What?" answered Ben from the other end of the room. "Wouldn't it be good fun to go up to the mountains where those poor children came from next summer?" said Jasper. "The minister says there's a capital camp up there." "Wouldn't it?" cried Ben, flying around. Then he came up to Jasper's chair. "And he's an awfully good sort of man," he declared, bringing his hand down on the chess table so that all the red and white men danced. "Take care," warned Jasper, putting up both hands to the table edge. "You'll have them all off." "Yes, he is a splendid chap." "And the camp is a big one," Ben went on, his blue eyes alight, and raising his hand again. "Ow, look out!" cried Jasper, but too late. Down came Ben's hand, and away flew half the chessmen, running off to all quarters. "Oh, dear me!" exclaimed Ben ruefully. "Now I have done it. Whatever did you speak of that mountain camp for now, Jasper King?" "Well, I didn't suppose you'd think it necessary to knock over the whole thing into flinders," said Jasper, lying back against the pillows. "You'll have a perfectly sweet time now, Ben Pepper, picking all those up." "I rather guess I shall," said Ben, getting down on his hands and knees. When at last he placed the last one on the table, he was quite ready to sit down and rest by beginning a new game. "And Father and Sister Marian could stay at the hotel if they couldn't stand camp life," Jasper was saying, as he set his men. But I don't believe Grandpapa will want to," Ben was guilty of interrupting. "Mr. St. John says it's splendid up at that camp. Oh, Jasper, don't you suppose we can go?" Ben was quite carried away now, and he got the king and queen all mixed up, while his knight and bishop had concluded to change places. "Oh, what a chap you are!" chaffed Jasper, pointing to them. "See what a mess you've made." "Well, I tell you, you mustn't talk about that camp if you want me to play," said Ben desperately. "Oh, well, let's drop the camp," said Jasper, turning his dark eyes on the chess table and revolving his plan, for it was his move. "But I can't. I've just got to talk camp," said Ben stubbornly. "Well, you can't. We mustn't either of us talk," said Jasper, "when we are playing." "Dear me, what a game that would be!" "Well, I've got to think camp then," said Ben. "All right," said Jasper. "Go ahead and think camp if you must. Then I will beat you all around Robin Hood's barn." Which he did, and then, as so many things occurred to both of them that had to be uttered about that mountain camp, the chessmen were shut up in their box, the new Christmas game table set back carefully in the corner, and the two boys gave themselves up without reserve to the grand plan for next summer. End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of Ben Pepper. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Ben Pepper by Margaret Sidney. Chapter 24. Jasper and Ben. "Oh," cried Jasper, "what fun! Polly could have all the fishing she wanted. Mr. St. John says the mountain brooks are just full of trout." Ben's eyes glistened. To go fishing had always been one of the longings of his heart that the busy Badgertown days had given little chance to enjoy, when every minute that could earn a few pennies had to be devoted to helping Mamsie keep the wolf from the door of the little brown house. "You and I would have some sport, eh, Ben?" Jasper leaned over to bring his dark eyes nearer. "Yes," said Ben. He couldn't for his life get out another word. "We must go," said Jasper to himself. "After that look, Father will say yes, I almost know, and I just think of Joel let loose in those woods," he said aloud. This brought Ben to, "Yes, I know," he said. "Joe would run wild." "Wouldn't he?" laughed Jasper. "Well, it would be the best thing for Percy and Van and all the rest of us," he added. "Oh, Ben, we must go." He brought his right hand down on Ben's with a slap. "Yes," said Ben, "but perhaps we better not think too much about it, 'cause if we couldn't, you know—" He turned his face away to look out of the window. "Well, we must," persisted Jasper. "And then, you know, just think of the tramps you and I would have over the mountains." "And Polly, too," said Ben. "She can walk as good as we can, you know, Jasper." "Oh, yes, of course," assented Jasper. "Why, Polly would go on everything the same as we did. Did you think I meant to leave Polly out?" he asked in distress at the very idea. "No," said Ben, "I didn't think so, Jasper. And Dr. Fisher would go. You know he's crazy to walk. If he had time, he wouldn't ever ride to see his sick people. Oh, wouldn't it be perfectly splendid, Jasper King? But we mustn't talk about it," and he pulled himself up quickly. "Oh, let's talk," said Jasper. "It's half the fun of making plans beforehand." "Oh, I wish Polly were here," and he gave a long sigh. "No," said Ben, "it isn't best to talk about it any more, for if we can't go, we'd have an awful tumble from the clouds, and I can tell you that would hurt." "Well, what shall we do?" said Jasper with a long face. "It will have to be something pretty absorbing to keep my mind off that camp, and our tongues as well." Ben rubbed his forehead and thought a bit. "I can't think of anything more absorbing than Jocko," he said at last. "Well, Jocko it is," said Jasper, laughing. "Oh, I wish we had some peanuts to give him," he said suddenly. "I'll run downtown and get some," said Ben. "Don't be gone long," begged Jasper. "No, sir," said Ben, and he was off. Polly and all the others must be just about midway to the country town where they would stop for supper. Ben couldn't help but think of it as he dashed down the frozen driveway that gave out such a delightful scrunch, scrunch to his hurrying feet. He drew his breath hard, thrust his hands in his pockets, and whistled. Oh, how gloriously the winter sunshine glistened across the snow on the lawn, and how the gay equipages with their merry loads swept by him as he turned into the thoroughfare. He whistled harder than ever until he remembered that Mamsie didn't like him to do such things on the street. Then he stopped and set out at a run, that presently brought him up to the little store where Polly always bought her bird seed. Hurrying in, he bought a bagful of peanuts, then out again and home, unchained Jocko in the small room over the stable, and dashed upstairs. Jocko, who seemed to know at once there were peanuts in the bag dangling from Ben's other hand, got between Ben's legs at every possible chance, thus impeding the progress seriously. "Oh, you rascal!" exclaimed Ben, shaking the bag at him. "You shan't have one if you don't behave," and he shortened his grip on the chain to keep Jocko on one side if possible. Jocko wrinkled up his eyelids and teased and whined, sending out a brisk paw to snatch the bag if possible. "Be still," said Ben, giving him a cuff with the bag, "and come on, and don't dance all over those stairs. Oh, such a piece of work," he declared, at last going into Jasper's room. "Have you come at last?" said Jasper, turning an eager face to him. "Have I?" said Ben, the monkey and he coming in together with a rush up to Jasper's chair, Jocko making a last dash at the paper bag. "Well, yes, I should say I had. There are your peanuts," throwing them into Jasper's lap. "Look out, or he'll have them," as Jocko immediately leapt into the center of the sofa blanket. "Not much he won't," declared Jasper, setting the bag back of him with a quick hand. "Hulloa, Jocko!" as the monkey gave a squeal of disappointment. "Oh, you shall have some peanuts, all in good time. There, don't cry. Hold your paws." Jocko, hearing this, stopped his lament and extended both paws, his little eyes shining eagerly. "Oh, you greedy little thing," said Jasper, laughing, and emptying a handful into them, when Jocko squatted contentedly on the sofa blanket, cracked some nuts as fast as he could, spitting out the shells to right and left. "Here, look out, you mustn't do so," said Jasper. "I'll take the peanuts away if you do." At the mention of this, Jocko stuffed his nuts with both paws into his cheeks, reserving one to crack and eat as he blinked first at Jasper and then at Ben. "He's making a lot of dirt," said Ben, beginning to pick up the shells. "I know it," said Jasper, "but he's such fun." "They stick awfully, those little red skins," said Ben, picking away at the little pieces, as slap went another shot, this time in his face. "Well, Jane can shake the blanket," said Jasper. "Stop that, you beggar," to Jocko. "And they don't leave any spot," as another shell and the shower of little red skins came flying out. "Here, I'll take those away, I say," but easier said than done. "You can't get those out of his cheeks," said Ben with a laugh, and giving up the sofa blanket as a bad job. "Well, we'll just let him finish them, and then I'll shake the skins out of the bathroom window." "And you won't have any more," said Jasper, with a bob at Jocko, as he squatted on his knee. "Those peanuts are gone, sir." Jocko, who cared very little what was said about peanuts as long as he had his cheeks full, picked the nuts out one by one, cracked and threw away the shells, with the same impartial attention to Jasper and Ben, and leisurely ate them. "Here's the bag, Ben," said Jasper, tossing it to him, when the monkey's cheeks began to flatten out. "Put it up on the shelf, do, for I don't want him nosing all over me for it." So Ben caught the bag and set it up high in the place designated, Jocko's sharp little eyes following every movement. "Oh, you needn't stare that way, you greedy little thing," said Jasper, "for you can't get that bag, I'd have you know. Oh, you are almost through, are you?" which was presently without doubt the case, proclaimed as it was by a loud shout for more peanuts, and the quick extension of Jocko's long arms. "No, sir," said Jasper, shaking his dark hair vehemently. "See what a muss you've made," pointing to the sofa blanket, and to the floor, and to his jacket, and Ben's as well. Jocko, who didn't care to waste time regarding these trivial things, redoubled his cries, till the room seemed full of monkeys. "Goodness me, what a bedlam!" cried Ben. "You can't stand this." "Well, do put the bag somewhere else than on that shelf," said Jasper. "If he doesn't see it, he'll stop." But Jocko, seeing no good reason why he should stop till he had his peanuts, gave vent to howls in another key, much worse than the first. "Ow!" said Jasper, with a grimace. "That sets my teeth on edge. Here, Ben, you may have your monkey," pushing Jocko off from his lap. "My monkey?" said Ben, running around with the peanut bag, looking for a place to hide it. "Well, I think that's nice, when you made me bring him up here." "Oh, well, he's yours now, as long as he's in your care," said Jasper, coolly. "That's right, Jocko, run after Master Ben," and he dropped the chain. There was no need to tell Jocko that, as long as Ben had the peanut bag, so he leapt to the broad back and ran down the arm, at the end of which was the coveted prize. "No, you don't," said Ben, transferring the bag to the other hand, when Jocko, like lightning, ran over the broad back again and down the other arm, this pretty game being played with no gain to either party until Jasper begged for a pause. "I should think you'd laugh," said Ben, turning round with a hot, red face, Jocko sticking to one shoulder, rage in his eye. "Oh, dear me," said Jasper, faintly and wiping his eyes. "Ha, ha, ha!" and he burrowed in the chair depths, holding his sides. "To get me into this scrape!" exclaimed Ben, flying around with a wild step. "Stop that!" for Jocko, in his little diversion, nearly gripped the prize. "There now!" He rushed to the closet, threw the bag in, and slammed the door. "Now, sir, who's got those peanuts?" and he gazed into the monkey's little wrinkled face. Defrauded of his prize, and, what was worse, with no hopes of getting it, for Jocko could see that the closet door was shut, he now set up a piteous sobbing, putting his paws up to his poor little eyes. And there he clung on Ben's shoulder, crying like a child. "Oh, I say," exclaimed Jasper, coming out of his laugh, "I can't stand this. Do stuff something into his mouth, Ben," and Jasper thrust his fingers into his ears. "He shan't have peanuts," declared Ben firmly, yet having no heart now to set the monkey on the floor. "There, there, Jocko, be still," and he patted him kindly. "Of course not," said Jasper, taking the finger from one ear long enough to hear Ben's reply, "but get him something else, anything." So Ben set up a hunt for something to appease Jocko, and at last lifted the lid of the cracker jar. When Jocko heard the click of china, he dropped one paw enough to peer around. Yes, he was going to have something to eat. So down went the other paw, which shot out to receive the tidbit. When, on being conveyed to his mouth, he found that it was nothing but cracker, a thing that Thomas and Jane and the other maids, who were always running out to pet him, gave him ever so many times a day, he spit it out disdainfully, clapped his paws to his eyes, and cried harder than ever. "For goodness' sake," cried Jasper, "can't you find some candy? There is plenty there in that box. I'll come and get it myself." And in another minute he would have been out of the big chair. "You stay still," said Ben. "Hush, you beast," to Jocko. And at last, after knocking down more things than he supposed was possible in that short time, the box of candy was found on the table, and a big piece crammed into Jocko's mouth. "Oh, dear me, how perfectly lovely not to hear his voice!" exclaimed Jasper, dropping his fingers and sinking back against his pillows. Said Ben. Then he set Jocko down in the corner, took a big piece of chocolate, and smeared the wrinkled face from top to bottom, then set the remainder in one paw. "When you've got through licking your face and rubbing it clean, why, then you'll go downstairs, sir," he declared grimly. "My goodness me, I am tired," and he threw himself into a chair. "Oh, what a scheme!" cried Jasper. "Oh, dear me!" and he began to laugh again, for Jocko, having swallowed as one morsel the big chocolate piece, was now endeavoring to lick his cheeks clean by running his tongue as far out as he could. To do this, as he always fancied after each fresh effort that there was much more up beyond his eyebrows, which was quite true, as Ben had been very generous in the application, he turned his back on himself, so to speak, many a time, to achieve the success he longed for, till he got out of breath and had to squat and rest, only to up and at it again. Just here in came Jane with a small tray, followed by Hobson the butler, with a larger one. "You are to have your supper up here too, Master Ben," said Jane. "Oh, am I?" cried Ben in a pleased tone. "Yes, Mrs. Fisher said so," said Jane, depositing her tray on the table. "Oh, that nasty monkey!" she squealed, catching sight of Jocko, who was beginning on a fresh attempt to get the sweet stuff off from his face. "Oh, me!" "He won't hurt you, Jane," said Ben. "He's much too occupied. And Hobson, after you've set the table, you can take him downstairs." "All right, Master Ben," said Hobson, pulling out the tea-table from the wall and opening its leaves to deftly lay the cloth, Jane going gingerly about to help as far as she could, seeing that she must keep a sharp eye on Jocko. "It seems so funny to have supper instead of dinner," said Jasper. "I haven't gotten used to it after all these weeks. And to think of its being time! Haven't you made a mistake and brought it too early, Hobson? Do look at your watch, Ben." "It is a bit early, sir," said Hobson, "but Dr. Fisher ordered it now." "It's 5:30, said Ben, "but it hasn't grown dark hardly any. Well, we must have the light turned on now," springing off to do it. "I know why I'm to have my supper a half hour sooner," said Jasper. "It's because I'm to be tucked into bed earlier tonight. Well, I suppose I must," he added resignedly, as a bright light filled the room. "Yes, indeed, we had such a good time last night," said Ben, flying back. "Now, this is jolly, isn't it?" his face lighting up. "Yes," said Jasper, "it's no end jolly," looking across the tea-table, as Jane lighted the candles under the red shades, pulled the curtains together, and Hobson adjusted the tea things. "Is there anything else you want, Master Jasper?" he asked. "No," said Jasper, with a quick eye for details. "Thank you, Hobson. Everything is very nice. Now, if you will just take Jocko." "Yes, I will, Master Jasper," said Hobson, going over to Jocko, who was still working away on his face, supposing he had plenty of time to attack the tea-table later. Jane gave a wide range to the two on her way out. When they were fairly started, Jocko gave a loud cry of disappointment, turning a baffled face to the two boys and the lovely table between them. "Oh, do toss the poor beggar a piece of cake, Ben," said Jasper, which Ben did, and Jocko, wisely considering it better to take it than get nothing, was borne off, the cake having been swallowed before he reached the bottom of the stairs, his cries pealed up till at last Hobson had him well out of hearing. Jane set the little silver bell on the tea-table, and withdrew to the sitting-room as usual, when the two sat a long time over the supper, enjoying it hugely. At last it was time for her to summon Hobson, and the two trays were carried off. "And now what?" said Ben. "Shall I read to you, Jasper?" "Oh, if you don't mind. Are you tired of chess?" Jasper leaned forward to search the round face. "No, not a bit, only it can't be any pleasure to you. I'm so stupid," said Ben. "I tell you what it is, Ben Pepper, you are not stupid," declared Jasper warmly. "Now don't say so again," he begged. "Oh, I won't if it makes you feel badly," said Ben, laughing. "Only I shall think so." "You mustn't think so," declared Jasper decidedly, "and do hurry and get the table and the men." So the little game table, inlaid and beautiful, was carefully brought out and set in place by Ben, the box of chessmen put in Jasper's hands, and then Ben sat down to the table. "You choose this time," said Ben, picking up a red and also a white piece to hold back of him. "Only, as I said—" "Ugh!" interrupted Jasper. "You weren't to say that again. You promised, Ben," he added reproachfully. "So I did," said Ben. "Well, I won't again." "See that you don't," said Jasper, laughing. "Well, I choose the left hand. Oh, you have the first move," as a white pawn came to view. And after that there was nothing heard in the big room but the ticking of the French clock and the crackling of the hickory logs, if we except Ben's hard breathing when his men were pushed pretty hard. And the first thing anyone knew, there was little Dr. Fisher looking at them through his big spectacles and beaming all over his face. "Well, well, well," he could hardly stop himself. "And so you are having a good time," he said to Jasper. "I should rather think so," said Jasper, lifting a bright face. "I suppose now you don't know what time it is," said the little doctor. "Oh, it's early, I know," said Jasper easily. "Why, we have hardly got through supper, it seems to me." "Then you must have been a good while at supper," said Dr. Fisher, composedly, and pulling out his big silver watch, "for it's 9 o'clock." "9 o'clock!" exclaimed Jasper and Ben together. "Fact." Dr. Fisher nodded so briskly that his spectacles slipped down to the end of his nose. "And so it's time for you to hop into bed, Jasper." "Oh, dear," said Jasper, with a glance at the silken canopy and covers, and trying not to show a wry face. "In with you. I give you 10 minutes." The little doctor laughed and went off, and immediately the room was in a bustle, Ben helping along the operation of getting Jasper to bed. And presently the light was out, and Jasper was saying, "Oh, thank you, Ben, ever so much. Good night." "Good night," said Ben, as he shut the door softly and went downstairs. It was so still all through the big mansion, little Dick and Phronsie, of course, being abed and asleep hours ago, and all the other children away. Ben opened the big front door and stepped out on the stone porch. Oh, how good the crisp air was! He sniffed it in and threw back his shoulders for another and another breath. Then he hurried into the house to get his coat and cap. And jamming this last on his head, he thrust his hands in his pockets and set off for a walk. Yes, they must, the merry sleightsful, be well on their way home by this time, because Grandpapa, who of course was going with them, had told Mother Fisher he should bring them home early. Oh, how good the air was! Ben thought he hadn't tasted any quite so sweet since he left Badgertown, and he deserted the sidewalk now, having reached the thoroughfare, and struck out in the middle of the road, where it was more fun crunching down the snow. How long he walked he didn't know. Suddenly sleigh bells jingled, and merry voices, and yes, there was Polly's laugh. And why, of course, there was Grandpapa's voice, and then, "Oh, there he is!" screamed Polly. "Oh, Ben!" stretching out her arms. And "Hop up here!" called Grandpapa, his cheeks rosy under the white hair, and up Ben went like a flash. One word to the driver of the 4 horses, and off they went, turning first in the direction from which they had just come, the other big sleigh following fast. "Oh, Grandpapa, we are going to give Ben a sleigh ride," cried Polly, in a glad little voice, and clapping her brown gloves together. "Of course," said Grandpapa, "we are going to give him a little one this time, and a big one, all made up on purpose for him, some other night." End of chapter 24. Chapter 25 of Ben Pepper. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Ben Pepper by Margaret Sidney. Chapter 25. It was Polly who heard it first. "Yes," said Madame Van Ruypen, folding her long hands in her lap. She sat at one corner of her library fire, in a carved high-backed chair, and the young minister at the other end. Both were regarding the leaping flames. "It will be best for you to return home tomorrow. Tell the mother all my plans for the children, and ask her permission for me to put them into school," went on the old lady, not raising her gaze from the crackling hickory logs. "Yes, Madame Van Ruypen," said the minister, "and then write me at once what she says. Meantime, I shall be consulting Mr. King as to the school. It has to be a peculiar kind, of course, none of the high-fangled ones, but a good, substantial, ordinary sort of one, dominated by a man with a conscience. And where we shall find such an one, goodness knows, I'm sure I don't." She lifted her hands in dismay. Mr. St. John, seeing that something was expected of him, volunteered the remark, "Oh, there must be such institutions. They are so much needed." "Just like a minister," retorted the old lady, who was nothing if not blunt, especially if it fell out that she took a liking to a body, so now she added, "Oh, you'll do to preach from a desk, but as to practical things, such as the selection of a school, why, what can you, in the name of sense, be expected to know, either about them or the masters who run them?" A little spot of red began to show itself on the fair cheek, and twice the young minister opened his mouth, but he thought better of it. Then he laughed. "Perhaps so," he said with a nod, and stretched his hands to the blaze. Madame Van Ruypen laughed too. Having never meant to give offence, that danger had not occurred to her, but she had been suddenly overcome, as it were, with a mortal terror, and all on account of those mountain children. What to do with them now she had sent for them, she had found herself unable to answer. She couldn't send them back home, that would be cruelty indeed, and until the plan for the school popped up, she was in a miserable state enough, so it was quite cheery to hear the bright little laugh bubble out from the other end of the fireplace, and she laughed so heartily in echo that Mr. St. John tried it again. "Well, now I feel better," she said, wiping her eyes with her lace-trimmed handkerchief. "You can't know, Mr. St. John, how very much I have been tried in this matter." "I suppose so," he said, the laugh dropping away. Really, when he came to think of it again, the wonder grew how she came to do this thing at all, and then how she dared to keep on so bravely. And that recalled old Moneybags, how he blamed himself now for calling her so in his thoughts on those Sundays in the little mountain parish church. Could she be the same person as this woman, wiping her eyes, so touched by the little cheer he had given to her perplexity? He cleared his throat. "It was noble of you," he said, his own eyes glistening. "Oh, now!" She turned on him a formidable face. The white puffs and Roman nose seemed to grow bigger. "You would do better to stop right there," she said, raising her forefinger, "else I shall wish you had gone home to-day," all of which made him feel decidedly like a schoolboy about to be whipped. And he sat back in his chair, quite depressed. "Let us put our minds on those children, Richard," she said at last, breaking the silence that seemed to weigh on one of them like lead. "I don't like your name, St. John. It's well enough for a grand person, but you're a minister, and probably always will be a plain man, so I am going to call you Richard." "If you only would!" he cried, the brightness coming back to eye and cheek, not caring in the least for the rest of her words. "So you like it, eh?" "Very much. I am, as you say, a plain man." "Besides being something of a boy," she added with a twinkle in her sharp eyes. "Besides being something of a boy," he repeated, laughing again. "Well, then, Richard, it is," she declared with great satisfaction. "Now then, the first thing is to settle those children in some good school, or rather in two good schools, as soon as can be done. It isn't good for them to be here, I see that. I don't know the smallest degree what to do with them, at least as far as the girl is concerned, and it is bad for them to be entertained all the while." Not a word about the demoralization of her houseful of servants, whose ill-conceived wrath and dismay were smouldering over the infliction of Elvira. "And they ought to be getting some education. Well, tomorrow you must go back and straighten it all out with the mother. That's settled." Then she sat quite erect to draw a long breath of enjoyment. "Now I'll tell you a piece of news," she said. "It's a secret as yet." Richard leaned forward with great interest. He certainly was boy enough to enjoy a secret, and his eyes sparkled. "I've engaged the whole front of the Mountain Hotel, the floor above the office, for next summer," she said. Then she waited to see the effect of her announcement. "You're coming up?" cried Richard in a glad voice. "It looks like it," said the old lady, grimly, but vastly pleased at his tone. "And I want you to engage the Potter camp for me. And you'll bring—oh, now I know what you are going to do!" exclaimed the young minister with great delight. "No, you don't know in the least what I am going to do, young man," she retorted. "Oh, go along with you, Richard," and she laughed again, this time as light-heartedly as if her years matched his own. "Yes, I wrote yesterday to the manager to secure the rooms. You must get the camp for me." "I surely will," promised Richard with huge satisfaction. "And tell John Bramble if he doesn't bring my boxes and express matter up to the hotel quicker this summer than he did last year, I'll report him to the government. Dear me, I want to scold somebody. Oh, and be sure, Richard, whatever you forget, and I suppose you'll leave out the most important things, don't forget to tell—what's that man handy's name? Shin? Shin, oh, what a name! Well, we always call him that up in the mountains, because he can shin up the trees quicker than anybody else," said the young minister, laughing. "But his real name is—oh, well, if he's been called Shin so long, why, Shin let it be," said Madame Van Ruypen composedly. "I'm sure I don't care. Well, be sure and tell him he's engaged for the summer. There will be plenty he can do when we aren't at camp." "That's fine," cried Richard, clapping his hands together smartly, "because, you see, Shin has so much time when he isn't hired for camping and guiding. And don't let those other children expect to come down. Whatever you do, don't raise any such hopes." The old lady here turned such a distressed face on him that the best he could do was to laugh again. "I'll remember," he said brightly. And Madame Van Ruypen slept through the whole night, having the first good sound repose she had enjoyed since the visitors had arrived. But up at the King household, oh dear me! It was Polly who heard it first. She was dreaming of the difficulty of making a little pink silk cushion out of a mussy end of flaming yellow ribbon that Candace seemed to have insisted on her using. And as she worked away, wishing it was pink, and trying to make herself believe it was pink, she saw it grow yellower and yellower, till finally she threw it down. And that twitched the needle and knotted up the silk thread, and then off her thimble flew with a little click, snip, and "Oh, dear me!" exclaimed Polly, and opened her eyes. She was just going to say, "Oh, I'm so glad I was only dreaming, and 'tisn't that hateful yellow cushion in reality," when another little click, snip, just like the one when her thimble dropped off in her dream, struck her ear. This time it was a really truly noise, and no dream, and Polly flew up in her pretty bed and leaned on her elbow. Yes, and not only a click, snip, but a flop, or something that sounded as much like that as anything that could be put into words. Polly flew out of bed, tossed on her pink wrapper, and only stopping to think, "I mustn't go into Mamsie's room, for that will wake Kingfisher. Papa Doctor was away with a sick patient out of town." She crept softly off to Ben's room, just around the angle of the hall, and flying up to the bed, she gave him a little nip on the shoulder. "Polly!" exclaimed Ben, sitting bolt upright, and dashing his hands across his eyes. He was wide awake in an instant. "What's the matter?" "Oh, I don't know," said Polly, huddling up to the side of the bed. "Only hush, do, the door's shut, but don't speak loud. There's such a funny noise. It's downstairs, Ben," she said with a little shiver. "Funny noise," Ben said. "Well, now you creep back to your room and lock the door, and stay in there, Polly." "Oh, Ben, don't go down," she cried, seizing his arm. "Do as I say." He never spoke in such a tone before, and Polly, who had no thought of disobeying, found herself soon in her own room, wishing that she hadn't called Ben, and longing to run out and help, and 1,000 things besides. Ben meantime was out in the hall, a stout walking stick in his hand, hanging over the banister. Yes, Polly was right. There certainly was a funny noise, and it appeared to come from downstairs, too. It wasn't just what he supposed would be raised by anybody getting in to rob the house. It was more like something dropping, and then another sound, like a flap of the window shade. But it was just as well to act speedily, and yet it must be done with caution. So he crept off to the back hall, where he could press the button that gave the signal to the men in the stable. And he presently saw the lights flashing as they turned their dark lanterns a second toward the big stone mansion. Well, whatever the trouble was, they would soon find out, for Thomas had a key for just such possible emergencies, and the search would— Ben never finished it in his mind, for a sharp noise, so near him that it seemed as if the person making it must be close to his heels, sent every bit of blood away from his cheeks. He couldn't turn, for what might be back of him in the darkness? It wasn't the click of a pistol exactly. Ben, in all his cold terror, felt struck with the little resemblance to any such noise. Still, there was nothing else so likely to be that very thing. Why, it must be, he concluded. Downstairs he could hear, with senses sharpened, that Thomas had entered the house and that the search had begun in earnest. Well, somebody, whoever it was with that pistol, would probably do something more than click it before long, when another noise, this time a little farther off, a soft pat, pat, sent his mind in another direction. Either there were 2 burglars who had worked their way upstairs, or the one with the pistol had heard the noise downstairs and concluded to try for an escape. And now Ben's blood was up, and he softly followed in the direction of the sound, grasping his stick hard and setting his teeth. It'll be easier for me than for the other fellow, as I know the way, flashed through his mind. But he didn't seem to get much nearer. Of course he would stop when there was no noise, then the soft pat-pat would begin at a further remove, and on Ben would creep after it. He must at least keep the trail till Thomas and the other serving man could put in an appearance on that 3rd floor. What? Ah, there he is. Again the click, and the portière twitched out by the sudden movement of a hand. Ben swung a stout stick above his head and brought it down to hear a squeal of fright and pain, and Jocko, whose tail only had suffered, leapt into his face. Over went Ben, the stick and the monkey together, just escaping the long stairs as Thomas and his men rushed up, turning the lanterns on every side to find the cause. Doors were thrown open and frightened faces appeared, while Polly was already down on her knees by his side. "Oh, Ben!" Then her fingers felt Jocko's hairy coat. "That beast!" It was all Ben could get out. Then he lay back on the floor and laughed till he was so weak he could hardly breathe. "He's a sweet, dear little thing," at last he made out to say. "Isn't he, Polly?" he ended gustily. End of chapter 25. Chapter 26 of Ben Pepper. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Ben Pepper by Margaret Sidney. Chapter 26. Could you take him, Ben? Of course, said Grandpapa. After this, Jocko must go. And of course, echoed everyone else. But where? Oh, do send him to the zoo, begged Polly. Do, Grandpapa dear, and then we can go and see him sometimes and take him nice things to eat. I don't believe Ben will want to go very often, said Jasper with a little laugh. Will you, old fellow? Yes, said Ben with another laugh. "As long as I don't meet him in the dark when he jumps at me from a curtain, I'd just as soon see him as not." "Oh, I'm so very glad he is going to the zoo," said Polly with a long breath of relief. "He'll be real happy there with such lots of other monkeys." But Jocko didn't go to the zoo after all, with "such lots of other monkeys," for Candace, hearing the news of the disturbance by supposed burglars at Mr. King's big mansion, and the consequent plan to send Jocko away, came waddling up the driveway as fast as she could. "Here's Candace!" shouted Joel, who spied her first. "Come on, Pip, I guess she's got some candy sticks." But Candace was so out of breath when she reached the big stone steps that she sank down to rest. If she had any candy sticks in the big black woolen pocket she always wore at her side, it couldn't have been announced at present. The truth was, however, that in the hurry and excitement of leaving the little shop she had forgotten them, whereat Joel was woefully disappointed, but he covered it up as best he might, seeing her chagrin when she pulled out all her things and shook the empty pocket. "Oh, me, Clare forgot 'em," she mourned, holding up her black hands in dismay, as the boys hung over her, still hoping that the candy sticks might be hiding in a corner of the big pocket. "Shake it again, Candace, shake it again," cried Joel. "Here, let me," he begged. "No, no, Master Joel," protested Candace in alarm, and putting both hands over the generous black woolen pocket. "You'll done shake it to death, you will. Dey ain't I tell you. Oh me, to tank I should gone and forgot dem. And it's all about dat dar monkey. Oh wee, I ain't no breath left." And she rocked back and forth on the step, fanning herself with her black alpaca apron, without which she was never attired for a visit up at the King mansion. "Well, Jocko isn't going to stay here any longer," announced Joel, briskly. "He's going up to the zoo." "Oh, no, he ain't, Master Joel," contradicted Candace, stopping her fanning to seize his arm. "Yes, he is, Candace," declared Joel, bringing his black eyes on her in surprise. "He's got to go. He's been so naughty. Grandpapa says it isn't safe to keep him here any longer." "Well, he ain't going to dat there zoo," protested Candace, bobbing her black bonnet, from which depended a big figured lace veil. "No, no, Master Joel. Oh, your grandpa won't never send him dar." And she clasped her hands, while the tears came into her eyes. "Yes, he will," stoutly repeated Joel, twisting away to stand still and regard her in intense astonishment. "'Cause he said so, and my grandpapa always does just what he says he will, Candace King." Whenever the children wished to be very impressive with her, they called her Candace King. This usually overcame her with delight, but on this occasion she didn't notice it at all, but beginning to blubber, she rocked back and forth on the step, saying between the gusts of her distress, "Oh, no, he won't, nebber in all dis world." "I'm going for Polly," said Joel, at his wit's end, and springing past her on the steps. Pip, not to be left alone with that singular old black woman, who now terrified him greatly, pattering after, the two raced into the house. "Polly!" called Joel. "Oh, dear, where is she?" "Here!" cried Polly, bobbing out of the music room, her practice hour being just over. "What is the matter, Joel?" "Oh, Candace is out on the steps," said Joel, "and I guess she's got a fit." "Candace out on the steps!" cried Polly, "and in a fit! Oh, dear me!" and she rushed out. To be sure, there sat Candace, rocking back and forth, her face covered with her big hands, and wailing miserably. "Oh, Candace!" and Polly sank down on the step beside her, and throwing her arm around the big black figure, she put her cheek up against one of the black hands. "Do tell me what is the matter." Joel and Pip, who had both followed, ranged themselves on either side. "He won't send him away to the zoo, will he, honey?" gasped Candace. "What?" cried Polly, for the words were so muffled back of Candace's big hands, it was impossible to hear a word. "What do you say, Candace?" So Candace went all over it again, but it wasn't much better so far as Polly's hearing it was concerned, and at last Polly gave up in despair and started to her feet. "I don't know what you were talking of, Candace," she declared, "so I'm going to get Grandpapa to come out and see what is the matter with you." "Oh, no, honey, don't," and Candace grasped Polly's gown. "You arsk him. That's a good child. Arsk him for poor old Candace," and she lifted her streaming eyes piteously. "Ask him what?" cried Polly. "I don't know what you want, Candace. I haven't heard a word that you've been saying." "She's awful funny," observed Joel. "I told you she was going to have a fit." With that, Pip retreated suddenly and ran over to Polly's side, around whose gown he stared with very wide eyes at the big figure on the steps. "She said something about the monkey," continued Joel, "and—" "Yes, that's it," cried Candace, delighted to be understood by somebody. "Oh, he won't send him to the zoo, will he, Miss Polly?" she begged. "Indeed he will," declared Polly positively, "and you ought not to want Grandpapa not to send him," she said, much displeased, "for Jocko's been very naughty indeed, Candace." "Den he won't gib 'em to me," wailed Candace, releasing Polly's gown, and dropping her head so that the big figured lace veil trailed on the step. "Oh, me, oh, my!" "What's that you say, Candace?" cried Polly, dropping down on her knees again. "Do you want Jocko?" feeling as if she couldn't believe her ears. "Ob course. That's what I've been tellin' you and Mas'r Joel all de bressed time," said Candace, raising her head to survey them both with extreme dignity. "Oh, she hasn't said a single word," began Joel. "Hush, Joel," said Polly. "Candace, do you really want Jocko, really and truly?" and her eyes shone. "Ob course I does." Candace's head bobbed so decidedly that Polly had no reason to doubt her. "I'm dreadful lonesome, and he'd be company," as she swept the tears away with both hands. "Oh, I'm so very, very glad you want Jocko," cried Polly, hugging the big figure, while Joe cried "Hooray!" and Pip, when he saw all things turning out so well, emerged from the shelter of Polly's gown and pipped out "Hooray!" because Joel did. "But Jocko will work mischief, I'm afraid," and Polly's face fell suddenly. "And just think, Candace, of all the nice things in your shop." But Candace was not to be balked. Having once set her heart on having Jocko as a companion, she was now prepared to show how she had counted the cost. So she drew herself up to her utmost height. "Phoo!" she declared, snapping her stubby black fingers. "Dat ere monkey ain't a-goin' to hurt none of my tings, Miss Polly. You know my old safe." Yes, Polly did, a certain hanging wire arrangement where various eatables were kept, to be free from the inspection of mice that were rampant in the room behind the small shop. "Well, I done clared dat old safe all out dis berry mornin', soon's eber I heard of de trouble. Dat'll be a fine ting for Jocko to swing in," cried Candace triumphantly. "But where will you keep all your edibles?" said Polly in amazement. "Oh, honey," exclaimed Candace impatiently, "I keeps 'em outside, of course." "But the mice?" suggested Polly fearfully. "Dar ain't goin' to be no mice," declared Candace decidedly, and clapping her big hands together smartly. "Do you tank any mouse is goin' to touch my things when he can hear dat there monkey a singin' and carryin' on? No, sir, he ain't." "Well, then," said Polly, springing up, "I do so want you to have Jocko. Oh, I do, Candace," and she clasped her hands, "if you are sure he won't hurt your things, and you really want him." "I'm sure," declared Candace solemnly. At this Joel bounded off, but Pip decided to stay with Polly to see the matter through. "How lovely!" and Polly's eyes sparkled, "that you want Jocko, and then just think, we can see him whenever we go to your shop, Candace." She bestowed another hug on the broad shoulders, or so much of them as she could compass. I know it, honey." Candace showed 2 rows of shining white teeth and a broad smile. "And den, when he ain't there, why him and me can talk, and it'll be real sociable like." "Yes," said Polly, quite as happy as Candace herself. "He'll be sich company evenings," said Candace, folding her arms in great satisfaction. "You see, I got her set up for a spell, 'cause someone might come in and buy something. Only last week Miss Arden's girl come in for a spool of thread. It's been mighty lonesome, Miss Polly." "So it must have been," said Polly sympathetically, with a little twinge of remorse that she hadn't thought of it before. "But then you've had your cat, Candace." "Yes, I know." Candace gave a truthful nod. "But when you says cat, you says all there is. Now dat there cat can't talk none, and no matter how I stuffs her, she only licks her paws and looks for more, and she ain't no good as fur's company, real sociable company, what dar is talking going on, I mean. And den just think what a beautiful voice Jocko's got." At that Candace fairly beamed. "Oh, I'll ask Grandpapa not to send Jocko to the zoo, but to give him to you," said Polly, preparing to spring off. "And I most know he will, Candace." But it was really unnecessary for her to do that, for Joel at this moment dashed in, screaming out, "Grandpapa says yes, he does. Candace can have Jocko." And presently Candace, chuckling in delight, was drawn within the big mansion, Joel and Polly on either side, and Pip racing along in the rear. And quicker than it takes to write it, the whole houseful knew where Jocko's new home was to be, and everybody thronged around the happy old black woman. "Only don't blame me, my good Candace," said Grandpapa laughing, whom the uproar had drawn out of his writing room, "if that monkey eats up all your shopful." "He ain't a-goin' to eat up my tings," declared Candace, dropping him so many courtesies it was with extra difficulty she got the words out at all. "Look out that he doesn't," warned Grandpapa, and he laughed again. "Well, now, the next thing, I presume, in the order of arrangements is to see that Master Jocko gets down to your shop, for that he spends another night here is not my plan for him." "Oh, I'm going to take him down," announced Joel easily. "You?" exclaimed Grandpapa, and he laughed harder than ever. "Yes, sir," answered Joel promptly, "and Candace is going too." "Well, I guess Candace wouldn't want Jocko by the time they got to the shop," said Jasper, sotto voice. "I guess not," said Ben with a laugh. "And I'm going too," declared Percy, pushing to the center of the circle. "And so am I," said Van, "if Joel's going. Can't I, Grandpapa?" he begged. "Goodness, what a procession!" exclaimed Grandpapa. "And of course David wants to go, eh, Davy, my lad?" "Yes, I do," said David, "very much indeed, Grandpapa," and his blue eyes shone. "I thought so, and I see no reason why you shouldn't be in the party if all the other boys go. But dear me, I couldn't allow it. Why, it would be, for all the world, like a circus, and besides, that monkey would get away from you, he'd be sure to." "Oh, no, Grandpapa, he wouldn't," howled Joel, quite beside himself with disappointment, and the tears began to come. "I'd hold on to his chain just as tight," and he doubled up his brown fists to show his capacity for keeping things. "Please let me take him." "No, no." Grandpapa shook his white head, and he didn't look at Joe nor at one of the other boys either, for their eyes seemed to be giving them so much trouble. "But I tell you what I will let you do. You can all go down this afternoon and see Jocko in his new home, that is, if Candace will allow it," and he bowed his white head as courteously toward her as if she had been a great lady. "For sure, Massa King," said Candace, showing all her teeth, her smile was so expansive. "Jocko and me'll be ter home, and den I'll gib you candy sticks," she said, turning to Joel. "Oh, goody!" exclaimed Joel. Then his face fell. Oh, you can't. Would take such a lot, Candace. We're all coming. Oh, you go along, said Candace, poking him with her big black finger. You're going to have dem candy sticks. Your grandpa's done give me dat there monkey, and you don't suppose I'm going to give you nothing. Oh, you go along, Master Joel. Meantime, Jasper was asking, Well, father, how are you going to get Jocko down to Candace's? It is something of a problem, said the old gentleman, stroking his white head thoughtfully. But the best way that suggests itself is, and he hesitated and looked anxiously at Ben. It's too bad to ask it, but could you take him, Ben, in the depot carriage? Thomas will drive you down. Oh, I'll be company for Jocko, said Ben, laughing. We'll have a fine ride together. How I wish I could go with you, cried Jasper. Oh, dear me, I'm well enough. Let me, father, do. The idea, exclaimed the old gentleman in horror. And you've been so sick, Jasper King. Oh, dear me, 'twould be such fun, mourned Jasper. Well, Polly, you come, said Ben persuasively. Yes, said Polly, I will. But her face drooped, and she couldn't look at Jasper in his disappointment. And see here, old Mr. King cried suddenly, Candace can drive down too, so go get your monkey and be off, Ben and Polly. And Candace, remember what I said, and don't blame me for whatever Jocko does in that shop of yours. And Grandpapa went back to his writing room, but they could hear him laughing even after he had closed the door. It was one thing to plan this fine drive in such pleasant company to introduce Jocko to his new home, and quite another to carry it out. In the first place, the monkey couldn't be found in his accustomed little room up next to that of Thomas over the stable. And Polly turned so pale that Ben hastened to say, Oh, nothing has happened to him. Don't be afraid, Polly. Nothing could happen to that monkey. Oh, there has. I know there has, Ben, she declared, clasping her hands in dismay, while the rest of the children, all except Jasper, who of course was shut up in the library watching proceedings as best he could from one of the long windows, ran this way and that, calling frantically on Jocko to come, with every imaginable blandishment they could think of as inducement. And Candace sat down on the stable steps and wrung her hands, and lifted up her voice in dismal cries. This was as much worse as it was possible to be than if Jocko had gone to the zoo, for now he had run away, of course, and probably never would be found. He's done gone to— Whar's dat place he come from, Miss Polly? Wailed Candace. India, cried Polly, hearing Candace's question, and running up in the interval of exploring several places where Jocko might be expected to hide. Oh, he couldn't go there, Candace. Oh, yes, he could, contradicted Candace obstinately. He come from dar, and he could go back dar, and she redoubled her sobs. But he came in a big ship, cried Polly, laying her hand soothingly on the fat shoulder. Do stop crying, Candace. We'll find him soon, I guess. But she looked very much worried. Have you found him, Ben? She asked in a low voice, as he suddenly appeared. No, Ben really didn't say the word on account of Candace, but he shook his head, and Polly running over to him, he drew her off in a quiet corner. I really believe the little scamp has run off. Oh, Ben, how very dreadful, exclaimed Polly, turning quite white. Whatever shall we do with Candace? And what will happen to Jocko? Oh, dear me, and she wrung her hands. Well, now, see here, Polly, said Ben, turning her around and gathering up her hands in his bigger ones to hold them fast. We have just got to make the best of this, and— Yes, Thomas was saying, and the rattling of a chain, together with the sound of his footsteps, struck upon their ears. I thought I'd just take the monkey out for a bit of an airing, and in they both came to the stable, he and Jocko together. It was impossible to describe the delight of the whole company at the restoration of the lost one. Jocko, who had felt his loss of caste considerably since his escapade of the previous night, put on at once his old airy demeanor, and capered and blinked and wrinkled up his face and wheedled and begged, and altogether quite outdid any of his former attempts in that line, until the children hung over him and protested that he must not leave them. Oh no, he mustn't. At that, Candace, who had found her feet in a surprisingly quick manner at the monkey's entrance, began to take alarm at once, and her black face fell. "But he has just got to go," said Polly. "You know, boys, Grandpapa said so." And Ben reiterating the same thing, the children declared, "Yes, he's going to Candace's." "And you are going down to see him," cried Polly. "Do hurry, Ben. We must take him right straight off, 'cause they want to go to Candace's shop just as soon as ever they can." So pretty soon the depot carriage, so called because it was one of the vehicles for common use in the establishment, being all ready, with Thomas, whip in hand, quite equipped for the start, Polly and Ben helped Candace in, or rather Polly did, Ben having quite as much as he could do to take care of Jocko. Then Polly hopped in, and then Ben, with Jocko crowding in between his legs, got in with some difficulty. "Oh, wait, do wait," begged Davy, before the door was shut. "I want to bid him good-bye." "Oh, Dave, you're going to see him in a little while," cried Joel, trying to pull him back, "just as soon as we get down to Candace's shop." But David persisted. "He's going away," he said, "and I shall bid him good-bye from here." "Yes," said Polly, "I think he ought to, Ben, because Jocko is going away from this home." So David climbed up on the carriage steps and shook Jocko's paw, and said "Good-bye" 2 or 3 times, because from the monkey's face he didn't seem to realize the parting at all. And then, as David had done it, why, Joel concluded that after all he wanted to. So up he climbed on the carriage step and went through the same performance, only he shook both of Jocko's paws. And then, of course, Percy and Van had to do the same thing, each being a little longer than the other about it. And then little Dick piped up, standing on his tiptoes. "It's my turn. I'm going to bid my Jocko good-bye, I am." "Yes, do lift him up, Joe," said Ben. So Joel gave little Dick a good fine lift, Dicky protesting so violently that he was going to get up on the carriage step himself, and trying to kick off any assistance, that he was precipitated to the floor of the carriage in a small heap. "Dear me!" exclaimed Ben, huddling up Jocko, who pretended to be very much frightened. "This is a circus, I'm sure." "Well, now, Dick, hurry and say good-bye," said Polly, "for Grandpapa expects us to start right off. And now, Phronsie, come, pet," as little Dick shook Jocko's paws briskly and tumbled out. Phronsie, who had waited patiently till her turn came to say good-bye, now put out her arms. "Take me, Polly," she said. "Yes, I will," said Polly, flying out of the carriage. So Phronsie was lifted in, when she laid her soft little cheek on Jocko's wrinkled face. "I love you," she said, "and you are going to Candace's house." "Oh, Phronsie!" exclaimed Ben with a grimace, trying to draw Jocko off. But Phronsie was not quite through, so she held fast. "And I'm coming to see you," she finished. Then she held up her arms for Polly to lift her out. And then Polly hopped in again, Thomas cracked the whip, and off they went, Jocko showing a grinning face at the window as long as the children were in sight. Then he sat up straight and looked the stout black figure on the opposite seat all over with extreme condescension. End of chapter 26. Chapter 27 of Ben Pepper. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Ben Pepper by Margaret Sidney. Chapter 27. Mr. King, who is that Pip you have here?" "Well, you are all settled, old chap," said Ben affectionately, with a pat on Jasper's shoulder, "for a spell at least." "That's so," said Jasper in huge satisfaction, and running over to get some books on his shelves. "Good for Dr. Fisher that he won't let me go back till the middle of the term. But I have to dig at these, though, else I'll flunk when I do get there," as he crammed the last book into place. "But you're not to go at them before next week, Jasper," remonstrated Ben in alarm, and hurrying over to him. "You know Papa Doctor said so. You know he did." "Oh, I won't have a bout with them until then," promised Jasper. "But after that, then says I, why, I've simply got to. Well now, Ben, there's Pip." He whirled around to regard Ben anxiously. "I know it," said Ben with a long face. "I suppose the little chap has got to go back and face those boys," said Jasper, ruefully. Ben swung off on his heel and walked up and down the long apartment. "You know just as well as you want to, Jasper King," he said, coming up to stand squarely in front of the tall boy, "how it will be when Pip gets back there." "Yes, I know, but perhaps the boys will treat him better now," said Jasper, yet he looked uneasy. "Yes, for a while," said Ben. "I think they will." Then he burst out with honest indignation. "But there are enough boys there who'll be at their mean tricks soon enough, as long as you won't be on hand to make them stand round. You know that, Jasper, as well as you want to." "Well, Pip is a different boy now," said Jasper, determined to find all the bright aspect possible to the case. "I know he is," assented Ben, pounding his hand on the table. "Ever so much more like a boy, but that will soon be taken out of him. Get him back there without you, or any one who really cares a row of pins about him." "They shan't take it out of him. Oh, no, no," cried Jasper in great distress. He really couldn't stop saying it. "Yes," said Ben obstinately, "they will." "Well, what can be done about it?" demanded Jasper, tossing his dark hair away from his brow. And he put a hand on either sturdy shoulder. "Speak out now, old fellow, if you have a plan in your head, and I'm with you to the last gasp," he added, in suppressed excitement. "There isn't anything to be done," said Ben slowly, his blue eyes raised to the earnest ones looking him through and through, "except for Pip to keep away from that school till you go back." "For Pip to keep away from that school," echoed Jasper faintly. "Why, he belongs there. Ben Pepper, what are you saying?" "I can't help it if he does belong there," said Ben. "The thing is to get him away for a spell." "How?" demanded Jasper, with a small shake of the broad shoulders. "Your father can do it," said Ben for answer. "My father!" cried Jasper in surprise. Then his hands fell away from Ben's shoulders, and he backed slowly off. "Yes, your father," reiterated Ben. "He can do anything, and you know it." "But Ben Pepper, you don't understand," said Jasper, very much puzzled to think how Ben, usually so level-headed, could fall into such a stupid misapprehension at this time. "Pip belongs to Dr. Presbrey. That is, why, you know the story. His father and mother are dead, and he's in the care of the doctor, put there by a sort of a guardian down in South America, where the forlorn little chap came from, and—" "Oh, I know the whole story," said Ben, guilty of interrupting. "Well, then, how can you go on so?" exclaimed Jasper, more than ever bewildered that Ben should propose such a useless plan. "Yes, but all that makes no difference," said Ben, snapping his fingers. "Your father can make Dr. Presbrey let Pip off to stay here until you go back." Ben set up his square shoulders and stood as tall as he could,
looking up obstinately at Jasper's face. "Phew!" whistled Jasper. Then he thrust his hands into his pockets and marched up and down the apartment, the same as Ben had done. "You see, Dr. Presbrey is a sensible man," said Ben, firing one of his reserve shots after the tall boy. "And when he knows how Pip has changed since he's been here, why, Joel has done wonders with him. Now that man is going to let him stay on a bit." "Joel hasn't done everything," observed Jasper, wheeling in his corner. "And your father can make anybody do anything," broke in Ben hurriedly. "Father never likes to interfere with people," said Jasper, running nervous fingers through his dark hair and wrinkling it up into waves. Then he tossed it back in irritation. "He'll never do it in all this world, Ben Pepper," and he strode off down the room again. "Yes, he will," declared Ben, standing still in his tracks. Then he fired another shot. "But of course he won't if you and I don't believe in it." "What do you mean?" cried Jasper, wheeling to run up and seize Ben's jacket button. "Why, I'm in favor of it, this plan of yours, Ben, only it's perfectly useless to begin with." His gray eyes turned dark with feeling as he fixed them on Ben's face. "That's no way to favor a thing," said Ben, quite unmoved, "not to believe in it." But I can't say I believe in it because I don't," declared Jasper, quite as obstinately in his way. "But you can go at it as if you wanted to believe in it," said Ben sturdily. "Well, I will, I'll promise you that," said Jasper, "for I want it as much as you do." "I know it," said Ben, bobbing his head. "All right, now we'll shove ahead on it," said Jasper with a laugh. "But father," and his face fell. "If we want it," said Ben, "we've got to make him want it too." "Of course. Well, we'll try for it," said Jasper, swallowing hard. "But there's the school. You see, it interrupts all Dr. Presbrey's work over Pip." "I know it," said Ben, and his face fell. "But you know everybody said Pip was so dull at school." "Well, that's because he was such a forlorn little chap," said Jasper. "Poor mite, anybody would be dull where he wasn't wanted." "That's just it," cried Ben eagerly. "Well, now, he'll study and take hold of things with Joel and David, and Dr. Presbrey will be glad enough to let him stay if it will only wake him up." Ben gave a gasp when he had gotten through, for he wasn't much used to long sentences. "Well, come on." Jasper picked him by the sleeve. "If we have to ask father, we best have it over with," and he hauled Ben off, never letting go till the two paused to knock on Mr. King's writing-room door. Then just a breathing space, when it seemed to Jasper that he must make a bolt and give up the whole thing. "Come in," called his father's voice, and the two boys found themselves before the big writing table and looking down into his face. It wasn't an auspicious moment, for a letter lay open that had evidently caused the reader a bad quarter of an hour. "What is it?" Old Mr. King looked sharply up from his fit of musing. Jasper felt cold chills run all over him. As for Ben, he set his teeth, and his right hand doubled up in his pocket. "Never mind, father," said Jasper, beginning to back toward the door, "and beg pardon. Ben and I can come in another time if you will allow us." "You will be good enough to stay now, Jasper, that you and Ben are here," said his father decidedly, the irritation still remaining on cheek and brow. And he set his keen eyes to work on both boys. "Now then, what is it? Speak quickly, for I haven't much time to give you." "Father," said Jasper, and he drew in a long breath, "it's about Pip." Old Mr. King took up the subject abruptly. "Well, what has he been doing?" he demanded. "He hasn't been doing anything," said Jasper. "That is, nothing bad. It's about something we want you to do for him, father."
What? It was only one word, and it came out like a cannonball. Ben's hand clenched together tighter yet, especially as he saw Jasper's cheek turn white. "Oh, dear," groaned Ben, "I ought not to have spoken to-day when he's been so sick." "Father," Jasper drew another long breath, then he looked steadily into the sharp eyes, "if that poor little chap only needn't go back to school yet, Dr. Presbrey will let him stay here until I go, if only you ask him." "What?" roared the old gentleman, amazed beyond his control. "You know something of the hard time Pip has had at the school," Jasper said persuasively, and though his cheek was white, he still looked steadily into the sharp eyes that now were blazing. "Oh, if you only would, father, get Dr. And do you mean to say, Jasper, that you would wish me to prefer such a request to Dr. Presbrey, that stern disciplinarian, that he should let a boy off, especially one who is under his care, in such a way as Pip is? Preposterous!" Old Mr. King whirled around in his chair, then back again, to bring his right hand emphatically on the table, till the disturbing letter and all the nearest papers fluttered in the wind of his indignation. "Father," said Jasper, then he stopped a second for the right word, but that wasn't allowed him. "And that you should ask such a thing amazes me, Jasper. When did you ever know your father to interfere in other people's affairs? When, indeed?" He was now so angry that he didn't seem able to contain himself, except by pushing about the things nearest to him, and, as his eye fell again on the unlucky cause, he blazed forth, "Never ask me such a thing again." "It was my fault," blurted Ben. "Then you are also to blame," curtly replied Mr. King. "Father," began Jasper again, brokenly, then, without another word, he turned and went out of the room, and Ben, getting out, he didn't know how, followed him to the other end of the hall. "Don't feel so," cried Ben, in a mortal terror for Jasper, Pip's cause now being so much less, and laying his hand on the shaking shoulder. "Oh, Jasper, don't." "We've hurt Pip," said Jasper, his head on his arms, as he leaned on the window seat. "That's the worst of it. Oh, dear me, Ben." "Perhaps not," said Ben, with a desperate attempt to be cheerful. "Yes, we have," declared Jasper gloomily. "Now we never shall get the poor chap the least help, not in all this world, Ben Pepper." "Well, we've done our best," said Ben, yet his heart fell. "And oh, don't blame father," said Jasper quickly, and raising his head a moment to look at Ben. "Don't, there's a good chap. He isn't himself to-day. He's had bad news. Can't you see for yourself, Ben?" Jasper searched the round face eagerly. "Of course I know it. Grandpapa wouldn't ever in all this world have gone against it if I hadn't made you go in there to-day." Ben, in his remorse, seized Jasper's shoulder and held on to it, saying it all over again, to wind up with, "It's all my fault, and I've ruined Pip's chance for sure now, and made you sick on top of it all." Ben groaned, this time quite aloud, and despite his efforts, he broke down and threw himself into the nearest chair, to bury his face in his hands. "Oh, don't," begged Jasper, quite gone in distress to see, for the first time in his life, Ben give way, and he stumbled over to him. A door off in the distance opened, but the sound fell unheeded. "Boys," up flew their heads, for there was old Mr. King beckoning with an imperative hand, "come to my room." And, not daring to look in each other's face, they found themselves once more behind the dreadful door, which was closed after them. "Now then, Jasper, my boy," and old Mr. King put a hand on his shoulder, "you sit there," pointing to a chair on one side of the writing table, "and you, Ben, pull up another there. That's right. Get on my left hand. Now we are quite comfortable," and as he sat down in his own big chair,
where we can see each other and talk things over." The old gentleman didn't look at them, but played with various trifles scattered over the table, the unlucky letter not being in sight, until such time as it might be supposed that everybody would be ready for conversation. Then he broke out quite easily, as if the most matter-of-fact thing were being said. "Well now, that little matter of Pip you were going to tell me of, what is it, Jasper, eh?" "I didn't mean to ask you to do anything out of the way, father," said Jasper, and his voice shook. "Of course not, said his father, with a wave of the hand. "Well, I was a bit unstrung, my boy." He ran his fingers through his white hair. "You must forgive your old dad." He coughed, twitched out his handkerchief, blew his nose violently, but didn't seem to get the better of it, especially as Jasper deserted his chair. "Oh, father!" he cried, falling on his neck. Ben slipped off his leather chair and crept to the door. "Hold on!" thundered old Mr. King at him. "Where are you going, sir?" "I thought perhaps you'd—" stammered Ben. "You're not to think. Come back and sit down." Old Mr. King pointed to the chair, and Ben found himself on it again. "And I've a word to say to you, Ben," said the old gentleman, "for you're mixed up in this business." "I know," said Ben, hanging his head. "So you needn't think to elude me. Oh, no," and Mr. King gave a short laugh. "Now then, Jasper," bestowing a pat on his dark hair, "you get into your chair and we'll see this thing through. Well, about Pip now," and both boys being settled, "you want me to ask Dr. Presbrey to let him stay here till you go back. Is that the idea?" The old gentleman glanced first at one and then at the other of the faces, now very much flushed. "Yes, sir," said Jasper and Ben together. "I know the poor little beggar has had hard enough time at that school, from what I saw myself," said Mr. King, "and I suppose I don't know half how bad it is." "No, you don't, father," broke in Jasper, quickly, and tossing the dark hair off from his hot forehead. It was easy enough now to find his tongue, seeing they were safely launched on Pip, for Dr. Presbrey even doesn't know it. "A precious set of scamps they are," declared the old gentleman wrathfully. "Gentlemen's sons! Pretty poor stuff they show for it, to hound a poor insignificant little specimen like that lad. They ought to be ducked in the nearest pond." "And it isn't always because they mean to be cruel," said Jasper, loyally, and slipping to the edge of his chair in his earnestness. "But they are, all the same," said old Mr. King, stoutly. "Oh, dear me, I know it, father," said Jasper, quite distressed. "That is, some of them are— Don't tell me any theories of 'didn't think' and 'didn't mean to,' and all that stuff," said the old gentleman dryly. "It's plain to see that the Presbrey boys didn't regard Pip in the light of a desirable acquaintance." "No, they didn't," said Jasper, honestly. "I don't blame them for not being especially drawn to him," said his father. "He's not to my taste exactly as a boy, but for schoolfellows to act so like the Dickens—well, there, that's my opinion of the whole matter." He brought his good right hand down again on the table, till several articles jumped, and the penholder fell off the silver rack and rolled to the floor. "I'm altogether too obstreperous one way or the other this morning," said the old gentleman with a laugh, as Jasper jumped and recovered it. Then the boys, laughing, the air seemed to be cleared, so Mr. King settled back in his big chair and folded his hands in real enjoyment. "Now, I don't know but that it would be a good plan," he said, nodding his head, "for me to request Dr. Presbrey to allow the little lad to stay and return with you, Jasper. Understand that I don't say that I believe it will strike the doctor so, but I can broach it, and if I put it rightly and—" "And you can, father," Jasper in his eagerness was guilty of interrupting. "He will do it for you." "I don't know about that, Jasper," said his father, grimly, but he was vastly pleased, nevertheless, at the words. "What I know about Dr. Presbrey gives me reason to believe that no one ever makes him do a thing." "Well, he will do it for you, I know," declared Jasper, shaking his dark head confidently. "But it may strike the doctor favorably. There's hope in that," proceeded Mr. King, briskly. "So I'll write to him and put the case as strongly as I know how. I promise you that, boys." "Oh, thank you, father," and "Oh, thank you, sir," from Jasper and Ben in the same breath. "Well, now, be off with you." The old gentleman dismissed them peremptorily. "For if I have this letter to write, I'd best have it off my mind at once." And off they flew on happy heels. "Dear me, here's Madam Van Ruypen!" exclaimed Jasper, too elated to choose his words. "Now, what shall we do, Ben Pepper? Dodge this way?" And they scuttled down the back hall, as Hobson flung wide the big oaken front door. They needn't have troubled themselves, however, to get out of the way, as the farthest from the stately old lady's mind was the desire to meet any of the children on this especial morning, her mind being weighed with other matters. When she was told that Mr. King was busy in his writing room, she waved one of her long black gloves at the butler, and said nonchalantly, "Oh, well, then I will see him there," and, to his great dismay, she sailed with her Roman nose and big white puffs well in the air, down the hall to his door. "Madam," essayed Hobson, staring after her, but she was just going into the room. As there was never any lack of directness in any of Madam Van Ruypen's purposes, or her statements, so now she said, scarcely pausing for a casual nod of recognition, "I want you to do me a favor, my good sir." Cried Mr. King, who had supposed it was Mrs. Whitney's rap that had called forth his "come in." "My dear madam," he rose, and with his courtliest air extended his hand, "you do me great honor," and he drew up a chair for her. "Well, if I do you the honor, you must do me the favor," said Madam Van Ruypen, with a little laugh, and settling her stately figure on the chair. "I shall be charmed to," said old Mr. King. "I promise you that, madam." "That's good," the old lady nodded with great satisfaction. "Well, now, you know, sir," then she paused, strangely at a loss how to begin, "that I am very much disturbed." The face under the big white puffs fell into long lines that added at once ever so many years to her age. "Oh, I am sorry to hear it," said old Mr. King, in great concern. "I am, indeed. In fact, I have seldom been so upset. Perhaps I have no cause to be. It may turn out well for me." She gave vent to an uneasy little laugh, made an aimless sort of attempt to reach a fan that dangled by a jet chain from her wrist, gave it up, and settled back rigidly in her chair. Mr. King, having nothing to say, picked up a paper cutter on his writing table and played with it, not looking at her. "I'll tell you the whole story, then you'll see how I've got the notion in my head," she said explosively at last, "a notion that has turned to absolute truth, as I hope and pray." Her thin face was white and drawn. "I shall be very glad to hear whatever you may choose to tell me," said the old gentleman, turning courteously to her, "and then, if I can be of any service, Madam Van Ruypen, you may command me." She nodded her stately head. "You knew Emily?" she asked abruptly, her sharp eyes full on his face. "Emily?" He searched his mind diligently, but no Emily, who naturally connected herself with the lady before him, appeared. "I am afraid not," he reluctantly admitted. "You cannot have forgotten my daughter," cried Madam Van Ruypen, "though to be sure she was quite a child when we took her abroad to live. "Oh, your daughter!" cried Mr. King. "Indeed, I remember her quite well, though, as you say, she was a mere child when you deserted your own country to educate her abroad. But she was not Emily in those days." He rubbed his forehead in a puzzled way. "Unless my memory plays me a trick, she was Helena." "Helena she was," assented the old lady, undisturbed. "I remember now, it was afterward we began to call her Emily, quite for a family reason. Well, that is neither here nor there. No, I won't go into details. Enough to say that Emily, despite all her advantages, disappointed us terribly. Perhaps you remember hearing about that. Echoes, if no more, and plenty of them, reached my old home here," she added bitterly. Mr. King bowed silently. "You don't know that Emily married against her father's and my will, that she refused our help, and went off with her husband to share his lot. Oh, she was a proud one." Madam Van Ruypen crushed her gloves together so tightly that the long hands within must have suffered. There was a pause, and Mr. King turned off to play with the paper cutter again. "And despite all our efforts, and after Mr. Van Ruypen died, my individual attempts, we never could get any communication with her or her husband. Mr. King, I never blamed her, it was the influence of the man she married." She faced him now with blazing eyes and head erect. Mr. King laid down the paper cutter and turned back sympathetically, albeit several friends in the old town had kept alive for Emily Hastings' memory much commendation that she did not yield to her parents' choice of the superannuated wealthy foreigner they had selected as a husband for her. "And he never let me know when the end was coming." Her voice did not break. She was to keep herself in hand until through. "Word was sent only after she had gone from this earth. Mr. King, who is that Pip you have with you?" The transition was so sudden that the old gentleman started nearly out of his chair, stared at her, and gasped, "Pip, my dear madam!" "Tell me." He could see she was suffering now. The little beads of moisture ran down below the white puffs, and her eyes were fairly hungry for the reply. "Pip, why, Pip," stammered Mr. King. "Tell me," she commanded peremptorily, "his name." Let me see, we have called him Pip constantly." He groped for the rest of the recital Jasper had given him one day concerning the lad so thrown upon their sympathy. "I shall think of it presently, or I can ask Jasper or Ben," starting out of his chair. "Stay." She laid a detaining hand upon his arm. "Where did he live?" "I recall that. South America," replied the old gentleman promptly. A spasm passed over her face. His father is dead?" It was almost a whisper in which these words came. "Yes," said Mr. King decidedly. "That is the reason that the poor little lad is under Dr. Presbrey's care." The first gleam of comfort swept over the long white face. "But the name, you cannot think of it?" she begged piteously. "Let me see." The old gentleman drummed on the writing table, rubbing his white hair with an absorbed hand. Left? Yes, I am quite sure. Leffingwell is Pip's name. Why, my dear madam." He started and put out a strong hand to catch her as she swayed in her chair. "What is it? What can be the matter?" She recovered herself immediately and sat erect. "I am convinced that he is Emily's child." "Impossible!" Old Mr. King started back and held up both hands incredulously. She twitched her black bonnet strings apart with a hasty hand, as if finding it difficult to breathe. "So I thought at first.
and I have battled the idea as absurd, but it has conquered me to-day to come here and ask you about his history, and now I know he is Emily's child." "I did not hear that she had a son," said old Mr. King, as something seemed to be required of him. "I did not know it until after his mother died," said Madam Van Ruypen, her voice breaking. "Then chance report brought me the news, but I could never get in touch with his father, though I tried many a time. Cornelius Leffingwell was—" "Cornelius!" broke in Mr. King. "The name of Emily's husband," said the old lady. "That is Pip's name too," said the old gentleman. Chapter 27. Chapter 28 of Ben Pepper. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Ben Pepper by Margaret Sidney. Chapter 28. Ben decides the matter for himself. Ben walked back and forth, his hands thrust deeply in his pockets. "It's no use, Mamsie." He came now and stood straight before her, his blue eyes fastened steadily upon her face. "I've just got to do it." "There is no need for you to say that, Ben." Mrs. Fisher's tone was quiet, but the blood was leaping in her veins. "You're my oldest child." Then her voice broke. "And that's the reason." Ben threw his head back and took his hands out of his pockets to clench them together hard. "It would be mean as anything to let Grandpapa do anything more for me, and—" "There's where you are wrong, Ben," cried his mother, eagerly and guilty of interrupting. "It is Mr. King's dearest wish to provide an education for your children. You can pay him back afterward. I have accepted for the others. Why not for you?" "Because, look at Polly. Oh, mother, think what Polly can do with her music." His whole face was working now, and his eyes shone. "I know it," cried Mrs. Fisher proudly. "Polly will be able to pay him back. There is no doubt about that." "But I'm different," added Ben quickly. "Such a dull, plodding fellow. Oh, Mamsie, what would a college education amount to for me? I'm best to buckle right down to business." "Ben, Ben!" Mother Fisher's tone was quite reproachful now, and she seized his hand and covered it with her two strong ones. "Any one can accomplish what he sets out to. You can amount to whatever you put your mind on, and you deserve a college education if ever a boy did." She broke down now and was sobbing on his shoulder. Ben didn't say anything, this being quite beyond him, to see his mother cry. But he patted the smooth black hair with an unsteady hand. "To think of your giving up your chance," at last Mrs. Fisher said brokenly. "It isn't right, Ben. Can't you see that you ought not to do it?" "But it is right," said Ben, sturdily recovering himself when he saw that his mother could really talk about it. "I'm to be a business man, and I'm going to begin at the very bottom, as an errand boy or an office boy, and work up." Here he straightened his square shoulders as if already pretty near the top of things. "Ah, Ben, my boy!" Mrs. Fisher raised her head to look at him. "All you can get in the way of education helps you on just so much." "And I can have all these years I'd be spending at college in learning the business," Ben hurried on, feeling if he didn't say something, he should surely break down, for there was such a world of pleading in the black eyes that he didn't dare to trust himself to look into them. "Don't you see, mother? Besides, well, I just can't do it." When Ben called her mother,
It always meant something requiring grave attention. So Mrs. Fisher knew as well then as afterward that it was a decided thing that Ben was to leave school and go into a business life. All she could say now was, "Come," leading the way to her roomy old sofa, where the children used often to tell her their troubles or joys to her as they sat side by side. When Ben emerged from his mother's room, he held his head high, but his breath came hard, and one fist deep in his pocket was clenched tightly. "Hello!" Joel plunged into him. "Where have you been?" And, not waiting for a reply, "Grandpapa says I'm to go if you'll go with me." He swarmed all over him in his eagerness. "Get off, Joel!" cried Ben roughly. It seemed as if he couldn't bear any more just then, and he gave him, without stopping to think, a little shove. Joel looked at him with very wide eyes. "You're always hanging on to me," went on Ben crossly, not realizing a word he was saying. "Goodness me, a chap can't stir but you must pop up." Joel stood perfectly still, plastered against the wall, his mouth open, but not equal to uttering a word, as Ben stalked on down the hall. "Oh, you think you're smart, I suppose." At last it came in a burst behind him. "Well, I don't want you to go with me, Mr. Ben Pepper, Mr. Ebenezer Pepper." Joel could hardly get the long name out, being so wholly unaccustomed to its use. "And I will tell Grandpapa I shouldn't have you go with me for anything." "Joel!" Ben called hoarsely after him, whirling in his tracks to see Joel flying down the hall. "Oh, come back." "You aren't going," declared Joel savagely, and stopping long enough to snap his fingers at Ben. "No, siree, not a single step." And despite all Ben's efforts, he pranced off with a final jump that defied pursuit. Ben stood perfectly still for a moment, then strode off up to his room, where he locked the door fast, went over and sat on the side of the bed, and buried his face in his hands. How long he sat there he never knew. The first thing that brought him to himself was Polly's voice, and her fingers drumming on the door. "Bensie, are you here? Oh, dear me, do open the door." Ben took up his head at first with the wild thought that he wouldn't answer. But then it was Polly calling, and such a thing as a locked door between them would never do. So he staggered off as best he might, not seeing his pale face in the mirror as he went by, and slowly turned the key. "Oh, Ben! Oh, dear me! What is it?" Polly cried, quite aghast at his face. She huddled up to him and grasped his arm. "Tell me, Ben," and the fright at seeing him thus drove every bit of color from her face. "Nothing," said Ben shortly. "That is—" "Oh, now you are sick," cried Polly, quite wildly, and with another look into his face, usually so ready, she tore off her hands and raced toward the stairs. "I shall call Mamsie." "Polly, Polly!" cried Ben, rushing out after her. "You must not call Mamsie. I'll tell you all about it, Polly. Polly, do come back." But she didn't hear anything but the first words, that Mamsie must not be called, and feeling more sure than ever by this that Ben was really sick, she redoubled her speed and rushed into Mother Fisher's room, crying, "Oh, Mamsie, do come quickly. Something is the matter with Ben." Mrs. Fisher had sat down resolutely to her sewing after the decision had been made by Ben that put aside all her hopes for his future education. She now sprang to her feet, upsetting the big work basket, and, forgetting Polly, said, "It's been too much for him." "What's been too much?" cried Polly, hanging to Mother Fisher's hand, her heart going like a trip hammer. "Oh, Mamsie, what is the matter with Ben?" The room seemed to go round with her, and everything to turn black. "Polly," said Mrs. Fisher firmly, "I cannot tell you anything now. You must stay here. I am going to see Ben." And Polly, left alone, had nothing to do but throw herself on the big old sofa,
where she crouched in her distress till Mamsie should come back and tell her all about the dreadful mystery. For that something awful had happened to Ben, Polly was now quite sure, as she lay there, her head burrowed in the big pillow, the wildest thoughts running through her brain. The first thing she knew, a hard little hand was tucked into her neck. She knew Joel's tickles, that he loved to give her, long before he sang out, "Polly Pepper lying down in the daytime! Aren't you ashamed?" "Oh, Joel!" cried Polly in a smothered voice. "Do go away," she begged. For answer, Joel slid to his knees and crowded his chubby face into the pillow. "Are you sick, Polly?" he cried in an awestruck voice. "No," said Polly, wriggling hard to keep him from seeing her face. "Do please go away, Joey." "I know you're sick," contradicted Joel stubbornly, and bounding to his feet. "Where's Mamsie?" peering all around the room. Polly didn't answer, being unwilling to tell about Ben. "Well, I shall go and find her," declared Joel, decidedly, preparing to rush off. "You must not," cried Polly, bounding up to sit straight. "You mustn't and you can't, because—" "Because what?" demanded Joel, coming back to the sofa to fasten his black eyes on her face. "Oh, because—" began Polly, again casting frantically about in her mind what to say and twisting her handkerchief with nervous fingers. "Now I know that Mamsie is sick and you're keeping it from me," cried Joel in a loud, insistent voice, "and I shall go and find her. So there, Polly Pepper." "Joel, if you do—" began Polly, desperately, seizing his jacket end. Then she knew he would have to be told when she saw his face, for nothing could be worse than to let him think that anything had happened to Mamsie. "I'll tell you all about it," she promised. "Do sit down," and she pulled him into the corner of the big sofa by her side. "You see, it's about Ben." Joe whirled around and fixed wide eyes of astonishment upon her. "And I don't know in the least," said Polly brokenly, "what's the matter with him. He acts so funny, Joel, you can't think," she brought up mournfully, while she twisted her poor handkerchief worse than ever. Joel pushed his face up to scan her thoughtfully to see if there were anything more forthcoming. "And to think of it, Ben," went on Polly in a fresh gust, "he's never acted so. O dear me, what can it be, Joel?" In her distress she forgot that she was to comfort him, and she seized his arm and clung to it. "It's me," blurted Joel, forgetting grammar and everything else. And pulling away from her, he slipped off the sofa and began a quick pace to the door. "Where are you going?" Polly flew after him, and although he ran smartly, she had hold of his jacket end. "Joel Pepper, you must not go up to Ben's room. Mamsie wouldn't let me." "But I made him bad," said Joel, his face dreadfully red and twitching violently to get free. "You made him bad," repeated Polly faintly, and tumbling backward in surprise, she let the jacket end go. "O dear me!" "And I'm going to make him well," screamed Joel, plunging off. She could hear him clambering up over the stairs two at a time. "If only I could go too," mourned Polly, having nothing to do but go slowly back and shut herself into Mamsie's room as bidden. She threw herself down again on the old sofa, and buried her face in the pillows. It was Joel who bounded in and up to her side, calling, "Oh, Polly!" that sent her flying up to sit straight. "Ben wants you," he cried excitedly. "Oh, Joel, what is it?" she exclaimed, flying off from the sofa. "What is the matter with Ben?" "Nothing," said Joel, in a high glee. As long as Ben wasn't sick, and he had made matters right with him, the rest could wait. So downstairs Joel ran to Grandpapa to tell him that he had made a grand mistake, that he did want Ben to go on the expedition, no more nor less than a visit to the museum. "I thought so, my boy," said old Mr. King, patting him on the shoulder. "Now, if I were you,
I wouldn't go off half-cocked again, especially with Ben. No doubt he was in the wrong, too. There are always two sides to a thing." "Oh, no, he wasn't," protested Joel, terribly alarmed lest Ben should be blamed. "I was cross, Grandpapa. 'Twas all my fault." He was so distressed that the old gentleman hastened to add, "Yes, yes, well, there now, that's quite enough. As I've never seen Ben treat you one half as badly as you deserve, sir, I'll believe you. Now be off with you, Joel." And with a little laugh and another last pat, he dismissed him. Meantime, Polly was having a perfectly dreadful time up in Ben's room. It took Mrs. Fisher as well as Ben to comfort her in the least for her dreadful disappointment that Ben was not going to accept a long and thorough education at Mr. King's hands. But all this was as nothing to Grandpapa's dismay when the truth came out, and it took more than the combined efforts of the whole household to restore him to equanimity when he saw that Ben was actually not to be moved from his resolution. It was little Dr. Fisher who finally achieved the first bit of resignation reached. "Now, my good sir," the little man put himself, unasked, beside the stately figure pacing with ill-concealed irritation down the long path. It was several days since Ben had made his announcement, and Grandpapa had been hoping against all obstacles that the boy would give in at the last. But today even that hope slipped away. "Let me speak a word for Ben," the little doctor went on, raising his big spectacles just as cheerfully to the clouded face as if a warm invitation had been extended him. "Ben needs no words from you, Dr. Fisher," said Mr. King, icily. "I really consider the least said on this subject the better, perhaps." "Perhaps and perhaps not," said the little man, just as cheerily. It was impossible to quarrel with him or shake him off, and Mr. King, realizing this, kept on his walk with long strides, Dr. Fisher skipping by his side, telling off the points of what he had come to say on his nervous fingers. "Do you realize," he said at length, "that you would break down all Ben's best powers if you had your way with him?" "Hold on there, man," roared the old gentleman, coming to an abrupt pause in his walk. "Do you mean to say, and do you take me for an idiot, which I should be if I believed it, that the more education a boy gets, the more he injures his chances for life?" The little man squinted at the tips of the trees waving their skeleton branches in the crisp air, then brought a calm gaze to the excited old face. "Not exactly, but I do say when you make a boy like Ben turn from the path he has marked out for himself, all the education that culture would crowd on him is just so much to break down the boy. Ben wouldn't be Ben after you got through with him. Now be sensible." He got up on his tiptoes and actually bestowed a pat on the stately shoulder. "Ben wants to go to work. Give him his head. You can trust him, and let's you and I keep our hands off from him." And the little doctor, having had his say, got down on his feet again and trotted off. All the remainder of that day Grandpapa went around very much subdued. He even smiled at Ben, a thing he hadn't done ever since the dreadful announcement that gave a blow to all his plans for the boy. And at last it began to be understood that the skies were clear again, and that things after all were turning out for the best. "But only to think of it," Grandpapa would go on to himself in the privacy of his own room, "mountain children can be brought down and sent into schools, and the Van Ruypen money do the old lady some good, and there is Pip, see what she has got there, and nobody to interfere with what she'll spend on him, and I am balked the very first thing, and I did so mean to do well by Ben. Dear, dear!" But as the matter was now decided and out of his hands, the next thing to do was to get Ben a good place where he could begin on his business career, sure of good training. So the following day old Mr. King dropped into the office of Cabot and Van Meter for a little private conversation. They welcomed him heartily, as usual, dismissing other applicants for the time, and shut the door to the private office, drawing up their chairs to listen attentively. "No business to-day," was Mr. King's announcement. "That is, in the regular way. This that I have come to see you about is quite out of the ordinary. I want a place in your establishment for a young friend of mine." The two gentlemen looked up in amazement. It wasn't in the least like Mr. King to ask such a thing, knowing quite well that to secure such a place required much waiting for the required vacancy. It was Mr. Cabot who spoke first. "I suppose he is experienced," he began slowly. "Not in the least," replied old Mr. King shortly. "On what do you recommend him?" ventured Mr. Van Meter. "I don't recommend him," the old gentleman answered in his crispest manner. "Bless you, I don't go about recommending people, you know that." He looked into each face so fiercely that they both exclaimed together, "No, of course not. We quite understand." "Well, what do you want your young friend to have with us? What kind of a position?" asked Mr. Cabot, patting one knee in perplexity. "Anything," said Mr. King. "Give him anything to do, only get him in here. I tell you he must come, and you've got to take him." He leaned forward in his chair and struck his walking stick smartly on the floor. "Who is he?" demanded Mr. Van Meter, feeling that the exigency of the case demanded few words. "Ben Pepper." "Ben Pepper!" ejaculated Mr. Cabot. "Why, I thought he was in school." "He was," said old Mr. King, turning on him with considerable venom, as if he were quite to blame for the whole thing, "but he has made up his mind to go into business. A very poor thing in my opinion, but since he's decided in that way, there's no more to be said," and he waved it off with a nonchalant hand. "Not so very poor a thing to do after all." Mr. Van Meter got off from his chair, stalked up and down the office floor, bringing his hands every now and then smartly together to emphasize his periods. "I was but a slip of a lad when I got into the business groove, and I've never been sorry I drudged it early. Now, Mr. King, it wouldn't be well to give Ben any better chance than I had. He must begin at the bottom to amount to anything." "He wouldn't take the chance if you gave it to him," said Mr. King dryly. "Why, there's where Ben says he belongs, at the bottom." End of chapter 28. End of Ben Pepper by Margaret Sidney.